A heart is a fragile thing, so is sanity, glass cannons and glass hearts. Okay, I've waited long enough. Carlia stiffened slightly as a pair of strong hands grabbed her shoulders. Her eyes growing most wide indeed. In the next instant she found herself spun around so fast so hard. She saw stars. Tiny little pinpricks of light danced at the corners of her vision, her blue eyes swimming as her head swam with dizziness, the series of 360s threatening to disturb the fragile balance of her stomach and upturn the breakfast of venisons and bread she'd eaten only hours before. What was that for? She stammered out blearily. Her companion's smile was decidedly cheeky, azure eyes glittering in the early light. You've been sulking like that since we broke camp. I had to do something. If something involved spinning her like a top, Carlia was most certain she wanted nothing to do with it. Everything was still spinning, so she had to sit down on an overturned log just to clear her head. Naruto followed, content to stand, but not content to remain silent. See, he said, you look better already, especially when you smile. Her first instinct was to gut him for that remark. She was almost certain he'd just played some strange sort of practical joke on her just now. Only the knowledge that he was possibly the most gentle soul in all of Skyrim and single-handedly responsible for the death of Mercer Frey stayed her hand. Something else, too. Something she'd been trying so hard to ignore over their journey, something that simply refused to be denied. Flushing. But why spin me? To knock that awful look off your face, hopefully. He crowed, offering her his hand. If not, then just for fun. Fun? Yup. His head bowed sagely as her fingertips curled in his, helping her step off the log. Fun is the stuff of the gods. So is ramen. But no, they don't have that here. Ramen? What was that? Shaking her head a little she resumed her trek southward, the hardy blonde following at her back. The rhythmic rustle of his light robes and armor was a balm to her ragged nerves. You are very strange, Dragonbane, she said at last. Another boyish laugh. Don't I know it, dat bao? She didn't know what to make of that response. The dark elf did. The Dragonbane was still just as much as mystery to her now as he was the day she'd sought him out. His temper was mercurial when it came to bandits and their ilk, but in the matters of the heart, he wouldn't hurt a fly. Naruto had a rapier's wit and a tongue to match it. He wasn't too shabby with a blade either. In another life, well, Carlia thought she might have loved him. She almost wanted to. They were alone on the path, Brynjolf long gone, just the two of them. It was really rather nice, she thought. If only her heart would stop clamoring every time he looked her way. She'd agreed to guide him to the Twilight Sepulchre after the blonde confessed to having absolutely no sense of direction. Carlia had been reluctant to do so at first. Indeed, she initially hadn't believed it was that bad in and of itself. Right until he'd started going north instead of south before her very eyes. He'd insisted it was the right way. Right up until they started climbing the 7,000 steps. Days earlier. Out of my way, oof, Naruto grunted, the air rushing out of him in a mighty oomph as someone in heavy steel plate slammed into him with all the force of a mammoth, almost bowling him head over heels. He very nearly slipped on the 7,000 steps leading up to High Hrothgar, nearly took an angry tumble down the mountain before righting himself at the last instant. Then his sword snapped up, caroming harmlessly of a hardened shield even as it swung at his head. What are you waiting for? He barked. Shoot her. Carlia drew her bow in a fluid movement, but her arrow pinged against a shield. In the next instant, her shot was lost as the two warriors closed with one another. Metal clashed against metal, the ebony blade grinding angrily against the nigh impenetrable shield. However, that left him with a free hand. Even as she swung down at him with her blade, so too did he swing upwards, the Rasengan smashing his foe full in the chest, shattering the breastplate like so much glass. An indignant shout graced his ears, as the spiraling sphere dashed her body against the mountainside. He thought he was prepared for that much. He was not, however, prepared for her to stand up again. He certainly wasn't prepared for the gout of magical fire that leapt from her fingertips. Ah, fuck. His own rose in the next instant, fingertips frosting over. Ice smashed against fire in a clash of primal elements as old as time itself, birthing a misty fog. Naruto refused to relent, dropping his blade and adding another hand to the deluge. When the spell coalesced in his palm, it physically struck her backwards, a veritable hand reaching out to swat her off her feet. This time, she didn't try to lop his head off. You insufferable bastard. Naruto balked, lowering his still smoldering palm. Oh, he knew that voice, by sure. You never make things easy, do you? Just look what you've done to my armor, again. She tore off her helmet with an angry shriek, glaring emerald daggers at him. With the language barrier now torn away by the power of Asura, that voice was possibly the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard in all creation. It also terrified him beyond belief. Naruto. The blonde guffawed, laughing at the sight of her face. Then he grabbed her in a great big bear hug that had the poor woman sputtering and choking for breath. When she finally squirmed her way out of that death trap, a second surprise awaited the poor human. In the form of being swung around like a child. The warrior's yelp was, Carlia thought, entirely too amusing for her own liking. So was Naruto's roar. Isabel. Long time no see. Thankfully the Dragonborn had been intent on continuing her quest at the time, resolving to meet up with them in Whiterun later. She'd swore up and down that there would be a reckoning for his disappearance. It was just as well, really. Carlia wasn't exactly keen on involving a non-Nightingale in their business. Naruto must have sensed as much, because he was all too eager to put High Hrothgar behind and let her lead after that. It was a little touching, really, rather than go with Isabel and associate with a bunch of old bearded assholes. As he put it, he chose to honor his promise to her, putting it ahead of his duty. His loyalty had been touching at the time. If she was entirely honest with herself, it still was. So instead of returning home, they'd spent the last 3 days trekking west towards their goal. Surely she deserved a little happiness? Hello, Carlia-chan? A hand waved before her face, startling her. I could stab you for that, you know, most unwise of you. That got a blink out of him. What can I say? I'm a genius at doing things I shouldn't. She arched a slender eyebrow. And I'm the Queen of Skyrim. He promptly prostrated himself behind her on the road. I bow before your awesomeness, your highness. We are not worthy to be in your presence. A silence followed. Naruto snickered. Carlia felt herself smiling as well, and then something came uncorked deep within her. Naruto. That's not even a word. Of course it is, he bolted up again, grinning. I made it up. The laughter when it came, surprised her with its vehemence. It tore its way out of her in great gasping gulps, refusing to be denied. She couldn't stop, couldn't think until they were sagging against each other, until she was physically crying. Such was her mirth, chest heaving for air. How long had it been since she'd laughed like this? Not since Gallus's demise. It used to feel like a betrayal, a mockery of his memory. This time, it didn't. Itchy, felt good, clean, whole. Why was that? She ducked her head at the thought, suddenly feeling shy. When he looked away, she dared to peer up at him beneath her lashes. Why? Why, could about him? Her gaze sought the sun, seeking answers there. Then her eyes bulged. Laughter died on her lips. Duck. Duck? Naruto blinked, not interpreting her meaning as she dove off the path and drew her bow. What do you mean, duck? I don't see any fuck. The words bleated out of him in a rush as he saw the massive shadow swooping down on him. Before the dragon hit, then the world went sideways. Everything suddenly erupted, trees uprooting, great clods of earth ripped free by those jagged claws. Naruto, trapped within its jaws. In its mouth. Carlia realized with belated horror that the beast had swooped down and eaten him, or rather, it was making a valiant attempt of it. Not content to be digested, its prey was fighting back. For a moment Carlia just stood there, an arrow knocked to her bow, gawping. By the Dark Lady, this man was mad. Oi, oi, oi. Do I look like food to you? Let go of me. He looked more annoyed than anything else the shinobi did, a look of irritation crossing his whiskered as he planted his boots against the lower jaw, used an arm to steady himself, and relentlessly drove Chillrend up into the beast's mouth, the blue blade flashing again and again, and again. The beast's fangs sank into his forearm and thigh, rending muscle and bones, but he barely even seemed to notice it, focused as he was. As she looked on, the blonde visibly tensed, forcing the beast's gaping maw apart, inch by inch. One hand now forestalled its icy breath, the runoff turning to the road to frozen glass beneath their feet. When she saw the smile, a part of cringed. Laughter came next. Chillrend twisted in his hand, stabbing upward one last time, hooking him inside the creature's maw. Here it comes, he cackled. A little going away present for you. Naruto seemed to shimmer in mid-laugh, warping, twisting inside the lizard's mouth. Its eyes grew wide and it tried to swallow him, but too late. Something bulged in its throat. Time for lunch. One moment he was a man. The next she saw a giant fox spit something down the beast's gullet. Bijudama. That was the only word she heard, the only explanation she had. And then the dragon exploded. Bits of blood and gore fountained down around her, bones clattering to the ground with sundered scales. Naruto stood amidst it all and inhaled, drinking deep of the dragon's body, its essence, its very blood becoming a part of him, a part of his soul, until on ashes remained. A final exhale and the blood vanished from his face, woven into his very skin. He raised an arm to wave and she saw that the wounds were gone, little more than a few pink lines amidst his tattered sleeve. Ah, good meal. He burped, patting his stomach. Let's move on, shall we? Numbed, she led him on. Still, having seen it firsthand, her mind couldn't help but to wonder. Just what was he? Carlia refused to enter the sepulchre. Naruto thought he understood why, but he didn't press her. The silent look of anguish in her eyes told him all he needed to know. So he undertook the task alone, weaving through the winding corridors. His senses felt like they were being stretched somehow, as though an ancient entity had suddenly taken interest in him and reached down to lift a great burden from his shoulders. With each step he felt a renewed vigor surge him, an indescribable feeling causing him to hasten his gait as he strode through the temple. It felt like coming home. A spectral figure rose to greet him as he entered those hallowed halls, garbed in nightingale armor. Though Kurama remained silent, Naruto felt a flicker of recognition stir him. He'd never met this particular ghost, not once, yet somehow, perhaps because of the own armor he wore, he sensed in him a kindred spirit. "I don't recognize you, but I sense that you're one of us. Who are you?" Bit of a long story, that. Naruto laughed, a flash of realization lighting his face. "Let me guess, Gallus." He thought he saw a smile on that faceless specter. "I haven't heard that name in a long time. How is it you know me?" "Well, given that Carlia's been talking about you." Joy exploded from the spirit in a shout. "Carlia? She lives? I feared she had suffered the same fate as I then Mercer Frey is." Yes, no, yes to the last one. Dead as a doorknob. "I'm just here to return this." He held up the skeleton key, its angular shape shimmering softly in his palm. "The key? Then there is still hope. You must return it at once." "Let me guess. I've got a bit more to do in this quest, don't I?" That seemed to baffle the ghost of Gallus. "I beg your pardon?" "Never mind, just breaking the fourth wall." The tasks that followed were next to nothing for a shinobi. Stick to the shadows, avoid the corrupted sentinels, reach the Ebenmere. Part of him gloried to be back in his element, in stealth and shadow, where he'd longed to belong. He felt as though he were invincible, untouchable, as though nothing in this world or the next could harm him. So when it finally came time to return the key, he didn't hesitate. He jumped into that pit, felt the floor give way, and slammed it down into the indentation the moment he laid eyes on Ebenmere, a conduit to Nocturnal's realm of Evergloom. In that moment, it came alive. Darkness surged forward, devouring his every sense, swallowing him whole, consuming him. And then she was suddenly there. Once more she rose amidst a flock of crows, a flawless beauty that would have put even the most beautiful kunoichi to shame. My, what do we have here?" She purred, eerie orbs locking on him. "It's only been a few days since I've set foot on your world. Or perhaps it's been a few moments. One tends to lose track." Her ebon eyes swiveled downward, regarding where the key had once lain. "So, once again the key has been stolen and a champion returns it to the sepulchre. Now that the Ebenmere has been restored, you stand before me, awaiting your accolades. A pet on your head. A kiss on your cheek, perhaps?" Naruto scoffed. "I wouldn't be much of a shinobi if I didn't want at least some sort of reward." A sultry smirk lined the goddess's lips. I suppose I shall give you something." She sashayed forward, hips swaying, robes undulating like the night itself. "You have more than fulfilled your agreement. Tell me, what is it you desire?" He watched, wary as she circled him, observing his every movement, as though seeing every line of him beneath the armor. Lips brushed his ear, eliciting a shudder. "I could bring you with me, take you to my realm. You would rule with me as my king, and I, your queen. All of Oblivion would be ours to rule." Tempting. But I'm afraid I'll have to refuse. "Pity. Then I suppose I'll have to settle for this, until next time." Her mouth graced his, bringing with it the sweet scent of darkness. She danced away before he could pull her into his arms, looking quite pleased with herself. "Regardless, you've done your duty to the letter, after all. But we both know this has little to do with honor and oaths and loyalty. It's about the reward, the prize. Fear not. The Thieves' Guild will have their trinkets, their desire for power, their hunger for wealth. I bid you to drink deeply from the Ebenmere, Dragonbane. For this is where the agent of Nocturnal is born. The oath has been struck, the die has been cast, and your fate awaits you in the Evergloom. You have but to speak the word, and I will come for you." "Oi, did she just, farewell, my dark prince?" Her hand trailed his cheek in passing, her touch lingering as she sank back into the Ebenmere. "See did the key stays this time, won't you?" Reality came back to him in a start. Naruto blinked, blearily, realizing one of two things. First, he found that the strange surge of vitality from the temple still lingered. He felt lighter on his feet, the shadows brighter to his eyes. The second, that he was no longer alone in the chamber. Nocturnal's words rang after him. "You have but to speak, and I will come." The devil did that mean? Then, he realized that at some point Carlia must have followed him in. He could sove across the temple, her hooded face fixated on a lone specter. He stood there, and watched with a pang of surprise, as she finally had her long-awaited reunion. "Carlia? Gallus? I was afraid I'd never see you again," she whispered, "that you'd become like the others. If it were not for the actions of this nightingale, your fears would have come true. He honors us all." Her heart gave a small lurch. "What will you do now, my love?" Gallus sounded almost wistful. "Nocturnal calls me to the Evergloom. My contract has been fulfilled." "Will I ever see you again?" "When your debt to Nocturnal has been paid, certainly. There is no need to hasten that. Though I must confess," his spectral visage shifted, cowl turning towards the blonde. "It heartens me to see that you have allowed yourself to love again. it is time for you to let me go. Carlia started, feeling betrayed. Gallus, no, It is all right, my love. I will ever await you in the gloom. The mists moved, and he was gone. Then came the tears. No, don't leave. Carlia wasn't quite sure when or why Naruto moved to her, why he chose to approach. The moment he did, she grabbed him, burying those tears, those sobs of her heart into his shoulder. She wanted to spit at him, to curse him, but the words wouldn't come, because she knew it wasn't his fault, that it was hers, all hers, and it hurt, oh it hurt. Eventually his arms encircled her, holding her tight. I know, it hurts. You can hit me, if you want. Somehow, those words only made it even worse, and she cried ever harder. Her heart was like glass, falling apart in his arms. And as he held her, he picked up those pieces. Strong hands stroked a small circle against her back, soothing. I miss him, she whispered. He murmured softly. I know. They stood there like that for a very long time. And there you have it, Naruto X Carlia is a very real possibility here. Not my best take on the world of Skyrim, I know, but it is my first. And definitely one of the most amusing. As you can see, I took a sharp turn from the norm here, as Naruto is openly interacting with Carlia, trying to keep her off the path of vengeance, only to find even more trouble awaiting him at every turn. And what business is this with Ayla? If you think his interactions with the Dragonborn were funny, you're going to love the next few chapters. Any ideas, folks? I'm more than willing to hear you out. Who knows what might happen? College of Winterhold and Hrothgar next chapter. Here we go. Chaos is set to ensue as of next chapter with more Dangard, Daedra, and the Thieves Guild abound and galore. Let's not forget the College of Winterhold. I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am, and of course, there's still so much more to come. The College of Winterhold, not to mention finding Isabel's mother and the Daedric weapons. Thieves Guild. The Companions, the Dark Brotherhood, and more. We'll finally get to see just what Dragonborn is up to during Naruto's adventures across the whole of Tamriel. As I said, I'm open to ideas. Look forward to it all, readers. So, in the immortal words Atlas review, would you kindly, and naturally, enjoy the previews? There be two this time. I'm sure you'll love both of them. Once again, to those who would misinterpret, I ask you to remember that the second one is written for comedic effect. Naruto is nobody's bitch, and if he at all acts like one, 'tis only to humor his poor victims, wives. And if this first preview doesn't make you go, "Ah," then you have no soul, I say. Preview. Arwen blinked owlishly at the piece of paper thrust before her face. Words stared back at her, little more than gibberish to the 9-year-old's eyes. She accepted the document, pondering over it for a long moment, wondering what it might be. Maybe if she stared at it long enough she would be able to ascertain its meaning, somehow. When she looked up, Naruto was still looking at her expectantly. Didn't he know she couldn't read? What is this? Sarana laughed softly. Go ahead, tell her before you explode. It's an adoption certificate. Naruto explained, his smile never faltering, not a once. Sarana and I had to go all the way out to Riften to make it official. But here it is. We're officially a family, Ibeo. Arwen hazarded a glance back at the vampire. She was actually smiling for once, her ruby red eyes glittering in the twilight. Naruto. And Sarana. Adoption. Family. Everything clicked together in her head. So, that means. Yup, Naruto's grin threatened to stretch off his face and fly away. One arm wrapped around Sarana, drawing her close. Tears gathered in the little girl's eyes, swelling, brimming over. Mama, Papa, crack. Isabel froze. With stiff, jerky movements she turned, her mage robes seeming to fluttering in an unseen breeze. If Naruto had any common sense, he would have fled for the hills, then and there. Instead he simply stood where he was, one foot planted over the prone form of the dragon priest, the other. Naruto blinked down at the broken staff, gathered it in his hands, then he glanced at a teary-eyed Isabel. It was almost humorous, really. This was important, wasn't it? Wham, ow. In the next instant she grabbed what remained of the staff of Magnus and proceeded to beat him about the head. Why do you always do this? Oh wow, I can fix it, Ibeo. Just let me fix it. The broken staff descended mercilessly once more. Idiot, stupid, imbecile. I leave you alone for a few days and this is what you do. Bite me, oh ho, why is it always trolls? It was too damn cold, of course that went without saying. Any place with the name, Winter, in its name was going to be absolutely frigid to say the least. But even with the name, all the warnings and a generous heaping of furs and torches both, it was still bloody. Cold, it was beyond cold. It was freezing. Nearly all his supplies were useless in this weather, the food on him long since perished or been devoured, leaving his stomach to loudly and vocally protest his every stumbling step into the pervading darkness around him. All this as a favor to a friend, Granted, a friend who appeared to be slightly homicidal, magic wielder maniac with a vendetta against all things feathered, not to mention someone who liked to swing first and ask questions later. Why was he doing this, again? So, no, Winterhold was not high on his list of Naruto's potential homes at the moment, especially not when he was freezing his fingers and toes off. And they weren't even there yet. His only slight solace existed in the fact that he didn't have to make the trek alone. For reasons he didn't quite understand, Carlia had chosen to follow him into the frigid tundra. All well and good, but for the life of him he didn't understand why. She'd spoken little more than the occasional word to him since the Twilight Sepulchre incident, closing in upon herself so completely that the blonde was beginning to fear he might have done something wrong when he'd embraced her back there. He felt like a kicked puppy. Speaking of puppies, and to think, only a few days ago he'd been nice and warm in Whiterun. Even before that, he'd trekked all the way to Riften and back. Worth it. Needless to say, the look on Arwen's face had been absolutely priceless. Flashback. Arwen blinked owlishly at the piece of paper thrust before her face. Words stared back at her, little more than gibberish to the 9-year-old's eyes. She accepted the document, pondering over it for a long moment, wondering what it might be. Maybe if she stared at it long enough she would be able to ascertain its meaning, somehow. When she looked up, Naruto was still looking at her expectantly. Didn't he know she couldn't read? What is this? Sarana laughed softly. Go ahead, tell her before you explode. It's an adoption certificate. Naruto explained, his smile never faltering, not a once. Sarana and I had to go all the way out to Riften to make it official. But here it is. We're officially a family, TT Ibeo. Arwen hazarded a glance back at the vampire. She was actually smiling for once, her ruby red eyes glittering in the twilight. Naruto. And Sarana. Adoption. Family. Everything clicked together in her head. So, that means. Yup, Naruto's grin threatened to stretch off his face and fly away. One arm wrapped around Sarana, drawing her close. Tears gathered in the little girl's eyes, swelling, brimming over. Mama, Papa, end flashback. So one little girl and 3 dragons later, here they were. Utterly lost. Why the hell does my life demand so much walking? Naruto grumbled, clutching his fur cloak tight to his body. Even wearing thick fur armor did precious little to insulate him from the snowstorm raging around them. The raw biting cold threatened to creep into every crevice of his body, slowly stiffening his limbs until he could scarcely feel them at all. Carlia seemed to be faring even worse. Her nightingale armor did precious little to protect her from the chill, and he could see her slight frame visibly sagging beneath the effort of slogging through the drifts. Hey, you alright? No, she admitted, reluctantly, her voice muffled through the mask, but at least you aren't trying to walk us up the steep side of a mountain again. Anything would be preferable to that. Oh ho, she speaks, hey, it saved us time, oi, the dragon might disagree. The Paul was telling. It's not like I knew the scaly bugger would be there, ya know. No, it's just yo never mind. They trudged on in silence after that, and Naruto found himself slogging on ahead, using his larger body to block the faltering elf from the brunt of the storm. Even with chakra actively burning through his body to warm him, he could feel his extremities less and less. Autumn weather was something he'd grown rather used to do during his travels across Skyrim, but winter, nothing could have prepared him for the cold, and the creeping promise of death that came with it. He didn't want to think how Carlia must feel. He could hear her teeth chattering from here. Without thinking, he slowed his pace, allowing her catch up. Don't you dare give her your cloak, Kurama growled. I'm having trouble enough keeping you warm as it is, even with the cloak. I'ma do it. Don't you do it. Doing it, Carlia actually squeaked in surprise, a startlingly girlish sound actually as the heavy furs settled about her shoulders, but she didn't deny the gift. Her small hands all but seized the hem of the cloak and wrapped it tight about herself. The pride of a thief indeed. Her masked face rose, gazing up at him. Thank you, she conceded. Will you be alright without it? Meh, I'll survive. Winterhold shouldn't be too much farther, right? The blonde forced the words out through his own chattering teeth, hissing as a fresh wave of snow stung at his eyes. I mean, seriously, we've got a map and all. We should have been there by now, and it's nearly night. If this storm keeps up and it gets much colder. The Dunmer seemed to consider that, her hooded head tilting in the direction of a looming mountain, expression inscrutable. We should take shelter for the night, she decided at last. Even you won't last long in a storm like this. Find me a cave and I'll take you up on that. Naruto agreed readily. As luck would have it, they did indeed find a cave. One occupied by a frost troll. He didn't like guests. Balls. Naruto roared, ducking backwards as a giant shaggy arm swept near his head. Why is it always trolls? Gah. He had no illusion of what had happened should the hulking brute get a hold of him, but the old bugger wasn't giving him the opportunity to strike back. Why can't these damn caves be empty for once? Carlia's reply was swallowed up by the beast's roar. Moments later her arrow sank into bone of its right knee with a meaty thunk of ebony meeting bone. Of course, that just made the troll all the angrier. Not the knee, woman. The ninja squawked, aim for the eye. I'm trying but you keep getting in the way. Oh, for the love of Rasengan. Say what you would about the beasts of Skyrim, they were as hardy as the terrain. He took another Rasengan to the gut to finally put it down for good, and even then Naruto watched until it slumped to the ground to be certain. He had taken more than his share of surprise attacks in this world already. Thank you very much. Just to be safe, he drove a dagger into its chest where its heart lay. The subtle twitch that followed told him the beast hadn't been entirely corpsey after all. Impressive. Carlia called, holstering her bow. It seems we found our dinner. Naruto beamed. Wonder how troll tastes, like chicken, apparently. It was indeed warmer at the back of the cavern, but only by the barest of degrees. Together they gathered what little they could in the way of roots and wood to construct a fire, even sacrificing the hilt of an old iron axe found near the back of the cave alongside some of the troll's fat and fur. Burning the entire body would be beyond reckless. Even in a large space such as this they couldn't risk the choking fumes that would result. Still, with the provisions they gathered and the fresh corpse, they were able to have something of a meal in addition to warmth. All things considered, it was actually rather nice. It was rather large to be called a cave. Now they had a good look at it, as if they were inside the very mountain itself than anything else. And here once, if the matted bedroll was any indication. He'd have to shake that out or risk getting lice again. Not the best place to rest his head for the night, but it was far better than seeking shelter in the storm. Staring into the blazing warmth of their fresh fire some hours later, however, Naruto found himself sighing. Neither could sleep. That brief bout of battle had brought back a bit of their camaraderie, but things were still tense between him and Carlia, almost painfully so. He didn't like that. He wanted to smash the tension like he did everything else, but he just didn't know how. Carlia had been a good friend to him, perhaps more than that. She'd even given him the means by which to make himself understood by everyone. And in return, he'd paid the favor forward and intended to keep paying it for as long as she would have him. Only, now, everything felt wrong. What could he do to fix it? This wasn't something he could grasp with his hands or chakra. Words alone held the power to shatter the silence. Sue, he drawled, rubbing his hands together, does this mean we're, good, now? Carlia was little more than a silent shadow sitting at the edge of the fire, unspeaking. Words it was, then. Look, the ninja found himself continuing, about what Gallus said back in the. You are not to blame, she said suddenly, the fault lies with me. Naruto turned, and caught a flash of ashen skin for the second time in as many days as she stepped out of the darkness. The dark elf was still in the process of undressing herself, having already shed the upper portion of her nightingale attire. Now came the gloves, tossed away to the side, pulling off the rest as he looked on, flummoxed. His tongue suddenly felt like a leading weight in his mouth, heavy and dead as he gazed upon her, unable to move so much as a muscle despite his best efforts otherwise. Within a good reason. The last time Carlia had gone and done something like this, they'd ended with a strained conversation about scars, physical and otherwise. Forgive me, Dragonbane, she said softly. I've been untoward towards you of late. Naruto had a sneaking suspicion they wouldn't be talking about that, this time. What are you doing? Carlia tilted her head slightly at the inquiry, those violet eyes shining like gemstones in the light of the fire, trapping its warmth like a pair of amethyst rubies. She did not snap at him for seeing her in her nakedness, though an arm did curve to protect the modest swell of her breasts from view. A pregnant silence hung between the two of them, broken only by the sound of soft breathing. This close, with the gentle glow of the fire playing over her ashen skin, she seemed almost another person. She seemed alive somehow, if that made any sense, no longer the somber wraith she'd once been in, shifting restlessly in the swaying light. Those bright eyes looked right at him, not through him, and he wasn't entirely sure what to make of that. At last, when it became clear he wasn't going to speak until she did, the Dunmer relented with a sigh. I'm not going to bite you, Naruto, you can come closer. No, 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 the Jinchuriki adamantly shook his head. I think I'll stay right here until you tell me just what you're up to. By way of response, she took out his bedroll, shook it viciously and laid it down by the fire. Before he could think to protest, indeed, by the time he realized just what she was planning on doing, she'd already slid inside, heedless of his exasperated sputtering. Hey, that's MI. You're not going to help anyone if you freeze to death in the middle of the night. Her soft voice overrode him before he could finish. We need to share our warmth. Armor isn't good for that. Naruto's brow shot straight to his hairline. Isn't that a little cliché? He croaked. Would you rather die? Well, no, then come here. Well, now, that's actually a half-decent excuse to. Not anther damn word furball. Reluctantly divesting himself of all but his small clothes, no fool, he. The blonde slipped into the sleeping roll with her. Warm. That was his first thought as his body brushed against hers. Carlia felt like living fire against his skin, hot to the touch in spite of the chill. He shifted slightly, stiffening as her slight form spooned up against him. It was only when her arms encircled his waist firmly that he finally realized Kar was wholly intent on this, whatever it was, much to his nervous dismay. "Well, you got me," he said. "Now what? If you're expecting me to sing you a lullaby, you'll be disappointed. I've got a terrible singing voice." The dark elf chewed her lip nervously, eyes glancing to him. "I must confess," she admitted, "there is another reason I proposed this." "No kidding." Naruto snarked. Carlia swatted him on the nose. "Ow!" he yelped, suddenly not feeling terribly eloquent at all. "I need that, to smell things." "Are you done?" "Yeah." "Ow!" he muttered, glaring impotently down at her. "Seriously, that's going to sting." "I've done some thinking," Carlia continued, ignoring his irritated look. "You've done a great deal for me. You lent me your aid when you had nothing to gain from it. You fought by my side freely of your own volition, and when you held the skeleton key in your grasp, instead of keeping it, you returned it. All this, without asking for, well, anything." She looked away, slightly flustered. "You've shown great courage and resolve, and I admit, I have come to care for you." Naruto stiffened. "Thought you loved Gallus," he sniffed. "I don't want to get in the way of that." "I did love him," she confessed, gazing deeply into the flames. "I still do. I suspect a part of me always will. That's why I've been so quiet lately. I've been dwelling on his words in the sepulchre." And she had been. It was part of the reason she'd asked to accompany him to Winterhold in the first place, so she wouldn't be tempted to simply fade back into the shadows and act as though she'd never heard them. If she'd done that, it might have spared her a great deal of suffering, but she needed to travel with him, needed to see him, to be reminded that the path of solitude wasn't the only one open to her. She'd given the matter great thought, to the point of ignoring almost everything else. Now, at long last, she had the answer she'd sought. "And what was your answer?" "Yes." The kiss caught Naruto entirely flat-footed. Because he all but folded against her, his entire body going stiff upon the thinly padded bedroll. But he didn't push her away, and so Carlia dared to kiss him again, delicately at first, hesitantly, afraid, terribly afraid. It was the first time she dared to open herself to another in years, and when he pulled away, she felt something in her give. No, he couldn't. She didn't think she could bear the burden of being alone again. What she felt for him, it wasn't love, not yet. It was too soon to tell for certain, but to bear herself before him and be denied. Well, she daren't look him in the eye. Not now. It took all she had merely to listen, to hear him out. "I don't think I'm worthy of these feelings of yours, but I'll try to live up to him, ya know." Carlia deflated. Of course he wasn't interested in her. Why would he be when he had Oh, her mind caught up and her heart soared, light and free. "What?" she managed weakly. "Rather eloquent, aren't you?" That did it. She all but lunged at him, welding her mouth to his. Naruto responded in kind as she licked at his lower lip, quietly begging to deepen the kiss. Carlia offered him a tiny moan, not one of annoyance but of relief, as his tongue swirled with hers, as he gradually reciprocated her clumsy affections. When her mouth met his again, she proved herself far bolder this time, fervorous with passion as their lips danced. Her hands took hold of his face and held tight as she pulled herself into his lap, seeking a hold against his hips with her legs. The large bulge pressing against her core told her all she needed to know. He wasn't pitying. "Already? Sorry," he laughed, sounding sheepish. "Body has a tendency to get away from me sometimes." For someone who hadn't made love in ages, Carlia found she was still remarkably adept when put to it. A groan fled from her lips as his mouth molded against hers, her nails clawing against his back as a hand rose to caress her breast, deft fingers flicking over a stiff nipple even as another slid between her legs to wet her entrance for his arrival. Gently, she rocked against him, slowly at first, as she shifted to accommodate him, wincing slightly at his length. It felt wonderful. Then he began to move with her, slowly, careful at first, but with increasing frequency as she never one for foreplay urged him on. Within minutes she found herself all but gasping his name, her head lolling back as he steadily coaxed her towards her climax. "Yes," she cried, her voice bouncing off the walls and ceiling of the cavern, "there, right there." When release finally came, it was a sweet, blessed one that left her feeling freer than ever before. Better than Mercer's death. Better than returning the key. Better than avenging Gallus. Better than all of them put together. For a fleeting eternity there was no hot, nor was there cold. She felt neither the heat of the fire, nor the raging storm outside. All she felt was intense, mind-numbing, make your knees drop right out from under you bliss, the like of which she'd never known before. Then all sensation came back, her body hypersensitive, consumed in a roaring tide that had the dark elf all but crying out with her lover and crashing down against his body, spent and gasping for air. It was an experience, to say the least, and Carlia couldn't wait to experience it again. "Have you ever thought about your legacy?" she asked him later, as they lay by the fire, fingers twined together. "My legacy?" Naruto laughed, staring at the burning hearth. "That's easy. My legacy's going to be a simple one. I'm the idiot who almost got eaten by a dragon, who crashed into the Dragonborn and turned all of Skyrim on its ear. They don't have to love me. Hell, I don't even care if they hate me, not really. I made my mark, and if I continue to do so, that's fine, too. I have a huge family and tons of friends, and you know what? What? He laughed. I'm okay with that, Carlia giggled. Only you would say such a thing. It was a sound so alien to her that Naruto actually started in surprise. What? I didn't know you could laugh. I'll show you laughter. There were no thoughts of the storm that night, the next morning. As it turned out, they needn't have bothered. Scarce had they reached the battered hold known as Winterhold than they realized something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. The very air itself felt charged, as though a massive spell had been expended over the entire area. As if that weren't enough, there was the massive ball of jade light all but swallowing most of the keep in the college itself. Naruto could already feel a headache coming on just by looking at the damn thing in the first place. Dear Lord, what had he gotten himself into this time? So it came as no surprise when they happened upon Isabel at the edge of it all, swearing like a sailor. You freaking piece of shite. She was cursing at the barrier as they drew near. I swear by the 9, Ankano, when I get in there. I'll just stay back, then, Carlia offered. Probably best, Naruto agreed. It was indeed, for upon seeing him, the Nord all but bolted in his direction. At first Naruto didn't recognize her, primarily because she'd switched to robes since he'd seen her last. That didn't stop her from trying to shake the life out of him, though. Scarce had she reached him than she took hold of him by the front of his armor and proceeded to shake the living daylights out of him. Where have you been? I've been busy, Naruto squawked out, his head lolling from side to side. Look what happened because of you, she cried. If you'd been here we could have prevented this. Me? What in the bloody hell did you do? Gathering himself up, the wayward shinobi flung an accusing finger past the Dragonborn, gazing up at the great, glittering green sphere of magicka encasing the college and all of its grounds. I leave you alone for a few days and this is what you do? Do you need a babysitter or something, oi? I suspect she does. A new voice chimed, else we would not be in this mess. That's some resemblance, Naruto mused. Isabel bristled furiously. Morrible. She all but spat the name. Ignore her. Savo's Eren is dead. The woman shot back with a scowl, because of you. Because of me? The Nord purpled. It was your stupidity that kept him from seeing the truth about Ankano? You impudent girl. Hey, why are you aiming at me? Naruto nimbly ducked as a spellbolt shot over his head, singing a few hairs in its passing so much for the peaceful approach. Isabel had gone and said something foolish again, inadvertently angering the one who was supposed to be responsible for her. That said woman looked remarkably like her was something he'd also commented on and gotten a fireball for his troubles. Said fireball all but smashed into the older woman, taking her ward and shattering it like a rusty sword. The other woman gathered herself up, prepared to zap the young mage to oblivion and back, and then, just like that, she froze. I know that spell. She breathed slowly, climbing to her feet. Just as I know the one I taught it to. It can't be. A curious expression rather akin to longing adorned her features. When you said your name was Isabel I suspected, but that. How you've grown, my little bear. For a fleeting moment, the spellcaster faltered, mother. Then her expression hardened. Bullshit. Isabel spat, you're lying. Naruto glanced from one side to the other, baffled. Alright, I'm totally lost here. No, this woman is not my mother. The Dragonborn replied coldly. My mother is dead. Dead and buried with my father. Hurt flashed in those dark eyes. Isabel, no. The younger woman shrieked. Not another word from you. You. She thrust a finger forward in condemnation. You lied. You left me. I don't want to hear it, Naruto. Rounding on the blonde all at once, the poor shinobi found himself pinned beneath that burning glare, helpless to do anything but nod. We're going to get the bloody staff, she said. And then I'm going to kill that elf with it. Then we are leaving this place and never coming back. If you would just fos ro da. Isabel's reply exploded forth from her in a vicious shout that all but flattened the older woman, hurling her across the yard to land in a heap amongst the drifts. The only sign that she yet still lived was a muffled groan issuing from the snow. We're leaving, Isabel announced. Yeah, I got that much, the shinobi replied, casting a regretful glance to the snow. Look, if that's really your mother, are you sure you want to part like? And don't break anything, she warned him sternly. Naruto winced guiltily. Wah, me? Since when have I ever? One ill-fated quest later, crack, Isabel froze. With stiff, jerky movements she turned, her mage robes seeming to fluttering in an unseen breeze. If Naruto had any common sense, he would have fled for the hills, then and there. He would have run from this place, from her shrieking like a madman. Alas, common sense wasn't something the Uzumaki possessed. Instead he simply stood where he was, a booted foot planted over the prone form of the dragon priest. The other. Well. That limb remained frozen, clutching the now broken weapon in hand. Naruto blinked down at the broken staff, gathered it in his hands. Then he glanced at a teary-eyed Isabel. It was almost humorous, really. This was important, wasn't it? Wham, ow. In the next instant she grabbed what remained of the staff of Magnus and proceeded to beat him about the head. Why do you always do this? Oh wow wow wow, I can fillet me fix it. The broken staff descended mercilessly once more. Idiot, stupid, imbecile, I am alive. Nearly had to claw my way back from the grave after a nasty bout of pneumonia and bronchitis, but I'm alive and here. Wishing you all a happy July. And to those of you who don't celebrate this holiday, well, happy update day instead. In other news, I'm working on an official update schedule. Yes, it's long overdue. So, in the Immortal Words Atlas review, would you kindly? And naturally, enjoy the previews. There be two this time, I'm sure you'll love both of them. Once again, to those who would misinterpret, I ask you to remember that the second one is written for comedic effect. Naruto is nobody's bitch, and if he at all acts like one, 'tis only to humor his poor victims, wives. And if this first preview doesn't make you go, "Aw," then you have no soul. No soul, I say. Needless to say, a ton of stuff happens next chapter. Preview, bad girl. Astrid blanched. Now wait just a minute. Papa spank. Ow. Wait. Are you enjoying this? That's seriously messed up. Oi. I hate her. You don't get to hate her. Naruto's thunderous shout drowned Isabel out with a crash of fire. You don't know why she left. You didn't even hear her out. Shut up. If you leave it like this, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Shut up, shut up, shut up. Make me. Well, you told me you wanted me to take responsibility, Sue. Ayla was silent for a very long time. What is this? She asked at last, staring at the ring in her hand. It was a small, silvery thing bearing all manner of shiny stones. She still didn't understand why he was giving it to her. Well, I don't know what your customs are here, but, well, where I'm from, a ring tends to mean. Naruto paused, looking very flustered. Well, it means Maria. She grabbed him in a fierce embrace before he could finish. Naruto made a small sound that might have amounted to a squeak. Lungs, Ayla-chan, lungs, can't breathe, you're hopeless. Tried and true, there, but then again, I like that about you. Heart for the helpless, interlude, all of my hate, Naruto, you have it. Ah, I love you too. Isabel grit her teeth and hissed out another angry breath as she turned the map end over end in her hands, all the while trying not to strangle a certain blonde and desperately seeking a solution to their problem. A solution that, until a few days ago, had seemed within throwing distance. A solution she'd been forced to buy off some shady dealer after walking into the ass end of nowhere and subsequently getting lost. Lost, she hadn't thought it possible to get so turned around in the first place and had let her guard down more foolshy for that. Naruto for his part, simply laughed at her ire and slapped her on the back. Hey, it's just a detour. I take them all the time. Well, I liked you better when I couldn't understand you, she sulked. Ah, that hurts my feelings. All one of them, back to work. Gathering herself up, the Dragonborn shot him her most lethal, withering glare, only to watch him shrug and return to his task. Her all-consuming fury was, alas, lessened somewhat thanks to his height. That and the fact that the time-flung shinobi seemed far more intent on working the field than paying any real attention to her. He seemed to be making relatively quick work of the task at that, tilling the soil with a patience and skill she hadn't known him to possess. It would have been comical if she were not so furious with him. By rights, she should have given up and left him dead, been done with him long ago. After all, he was absolutely infuriating and she couldn't stand him. So, leave. Simple, right? Alas, in Skyrim, things were seldom simple. After breaking and somewhat repairing the staff of Magnus, Isabel had almost dared to believe that her adventures in Winterhold were finally over. They'd return to the college, finish things with Enkano and leave for good, putting the ill-discovered matter of her mother far, far behind them. Not so. Instead, she'd made the fool mistake of trusting Naruto's gut and gotten hopelessly lost. After being chased by a pack of wolves, and blood mages, and another dragon. In that order. She'd nearly lost her life to the fell beast and well would have if not for her armor. Of course, said armor lay in ruins and now she had to wear this blasted dress until the smith made repairs. She felt naked without her armor, exposed. Thanks to him, because, divines be damned, their misadventures had landed them in Rorikstead. Not Winterhold. Rorikstead. Bloody Rorikstead, and of course, Naruto being Naruto, he'd taken an interest in the humble homestead. Not just in fortifying it against dragons and bandits, but the plight of two little girls who dwelt here. They've spent nearly 3 days here now, and for what? Mending armor, repairing staves, building walls, all because of. As if summoned by that very thought, a small hand tugged on the hem of Isabel's dress, questing for attention. Mama? Isabel's head nearly slammed into the table. Stubbornly stifling the sudden rush of heat to her cheeks, the Dragonborn brushed a hand of dark hair from her eyes and turned to face the interloper. She wasn't surprised to find herself gazing down at a young girl at the tender age of 10, her wide dark eyes peering up at her imploringly. Her heart gave an awful lurch. Oh, this one was good. Very, very good. She was going to be awfully clever in the future if she ever mastered that look. Men would lay blades at her feet in kingdoms low, should she ever figure it out. But for now, she was still very much a lass, and Isabelle refused to be swayed by her, or so she told herself. I already told you, Brit, I am not your moth. Forget it. She'd tried this argument 3 times already today, and the little girl didn't seem inclined to listen. What is it? By way of answerment, Brit offered her a bushel of lavender. Here, she replied timidly. I picked these for you. Isabelle felt her resistance begin to crumble. No. Stay strong. And why, pray tell, did you pick them? She put on a disaffected air. You said purple was your favorite, and, Isabelle blinked, confused. Why aren't you off gallivanting off with Naruto? 'Cause they smell like you. Brit confessed. And besides, I like you better, you can do magic. Well, that did it. Her heart melted. You'd have to have a heart of stone not to feel anything after that display. Oh, the Dragonborn cooed, sweeping the young girl into her arms with a squeal. Come here, you sweet, precious thing. If you wanted lessons, you just had to ask. Brit's face lit. Yay, in terms of appearance, Brittle looked much like her twin, Sissel, but for the fact that she liked to wear greens, while her sister favored red. Brit was curious about magic and seemed to have some manner of aptitude for it, while her sibling wanted nothing more than to be an adventurer when she grew older. There were other ways to tell them apart, of course, you just had to look. Just as Isabelle had. They were both a pretty pair to be certain. Fair, blue-eyed lasses with wild dark hair, a sweet demeanor, and not a mean bone in their wee bodies. Mischievous, too, as Isabelle had learned the hard way, for verily they seemed to delight in playing all sorts of pranks on anyone in arm's reach. Anyone could see they were just trying to get attention, no matter how negative this might prove. They were clearly lonely without their mother, and perhaps that was why they seemed too eager to cling to her and Naruto. The blonde was all too happy to give them the attention they craved, and for all her protests, Isabelle wasn't much better. For the girl's father, Lemkel, well, he was another matter entirely. He was the reason they hadn't put Rorikstead behind them. He was the reason they were still stuck in this blasted little town. He was the reason Isabelle was honestly contemplating cold-blooded murder. Now, to be fair, she considered herself a tolerant person. After all, here she was, teaching a little girl how to shoot fire from her fingertips. She liked to think she'd matured a bit since the outset of all this. Ever since that ill-fated misadventure on the border and the disaster that followed in Helgen, the Nord had suffered through much. She liked to think she'd come out of a more patient sort, bearing her own share of scars with dignity and pride. She was not prone to fits of anger or dismay. She'd run all sorts of errands, bartered with good people, and traded with stupid people. She had learned patience, but more than that, she'd had to learn charisma. Her silver tongue could convince all but the most hardened individuals, good or ill, that she was in the right. Lemkel was neither of those. He was worse, utterly rotten. In his heart of hearts he was simply a bitter, wretched, cruel and mean-spirited individual, rotten to the core. She wanted to disembowel him and rip his bloody guts out. Because the man was abusing his daughters, beating them, hurting them every day. She knew the signs. She'd seen them. She saw it in their haunted looks whenever their father drew near, those slight flinch when he started drinking, which proved far more often than the Dragonborn would have liked. The way they cringed when he hurled vitriolic abuse at them, never arguing with him, never meeting his eyes, seeming to shrink behind cover until the storm passed. Perhaps that was why they'd taken a liking to Naruto, of course. That lovable bastard just had to be good with children now, didn't he? And he them. Perhaps that was why the Dragonbane never quite let them out of his sight or strayed too far when the old drunkard flew into a fit. Presently he'd given them each a septum, and from there, they'd been inseparable. It was, well, cute, if she was entirely honest with herself. Isabelle didn't mind them, her own twin having perished in childbirth. She found she rather envied them the sibling rivalry they possessed. That wasn't the problematic interest that she took issue with. He seemed to take it upon himself to right every wrong he encountered, and, while she couldn't fault him for it, she knew disaster when she saw one. The whole situation felt like a bad spell, one that could blow up in her face at any moment. Time and time again Naruto had offered to simply pay the girls' way and take them off their father's hands, only for the nasty little skeever to refuse him endlessly. Naruto wasn't taking no for an answer. Well, he did claim to some kind of ninja, after all. She had seen that gleam in his eye once before already. They were caged little birds, and Naruto had his heart set on freeing them. By the 9, at this rate she was probably going to end up helping before the day was done. Cursing softly to herself, she viciously reaffirmed that this was the absolute last time she allowed the Dragonbane to lead the way. Never again, not now, not then, not ever again. She didn't know where he'd gotten this Daedra-cursed lack of direction, but this was ridiculous. How did one go west when they were meant to go east, south instead of north, up, rather than down? 'Twas an absolute madness. Maybe he really had offended a Daedra of some sort and gotten himself cursed. Chaos seemed to follow him wherever he went, either in his steps, the trouble he attracted, or merely the mischief he made. Spirits, was he up to mischief now? A booming roar jerked her away from her lessons with Brit, just in time to witness the power of Naruto's shout rend the air. For a fleeting moment she glimpsed Sissel perched on his shoulder, holding on for dear life and loving every minute of it as the wind picked up. Then the world decided it had enough and began to shake. Clouds gathered overhead, swirling, summoned by the blonde's powerful voice. Naruto barked again and streaks of lightning arced between them, bringing on rains, dancing wildly with passion and power as his hands waved, weaving currents of wind chakra into the mix. In an instant, the field he'd been tilling found itself drenched, dozens of plants showered with a healthy downpour. It was powerful display, reined in with the most masterful of control, yet something in it made her blood sing. She'd felt the power in his voice and it had spoken to her in a way she couldn't understand. Of course, that only compounded what came next. Huh? The blonde crowed aloud, observing his handiwork. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you make a storm. See? Instant watering. No need for chores. Beats using a watering can. I'm still trying to figure out how to make it rain ramen, but hey, it's a start. Sissel giggled, but her reply was caught up in the resultant thunder that followed. Not from the heavens, but the earth. More aptly, her now very wet and very angry father who'd made the mistake of being caught in the fields during Naruto's summoned storm. Judging by the bottle of Argonian ale in his hand and the conspicuous lack of farming tools, Isabel could only surmise that he'd been drinking again. Sissel's reaction and the words that followed proved her theory beyond a doubt. Wah! What do you think you're doing? Lemkel slurred, branding his bottle as he came staggering out of the fields, sopping wet. Look at us, he howled, I'm all wet, because you weren't working, and you? A gnarled finger thrust itself at the bemused blonde. Whiskers. How did you do it? Where did y'all get off teaching my daughters? Ma. Magics. I wasn't teaching, and as to the how, because fuck you that's how. What? Lemkel either didn't hear the blonde's reply or was simply too sloshed to care. For he marched right up to the blonde and struck him across the face, veritably spitting with vehemence. Isabel flinched and reached for her dagger. In the time it took her to do so, the blonde could have taken Lemkel's hand and the arm behind it in 10 different ways. Instead he simply took the hit, his head snapping to the right with a loud crack. Sissel gave a small gasp, but her father thrust her aside, shoving bleary eyes at the target of his ire. Lee. Listen here, boy, he hiccuped, you dragon what's it, you've got some nerve talking to me like that. No, I have more than nerve, but you don't know that, do you? His hand cracked out again and Isabel covered Brit's eyes just in time. Not a heartbeat later, they heard an agonizing pop. My arm? What did you do? Naruto pretended not to hear the man. I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you over the sound of your own bullshit. What part about Dragonbane? Did you not understand? I've got scales when I want them, for crying out loud. Lemke's good hand strayed to his knife. I'll kill you for. And Naruto's head tilted aside, just so, blue eyes burned red. Girls, inside. Now, Uncle Naruto needs to have a word with your father. Shit. Isabel knew what was coming. She'd seen it building for days now and knew if she didn't interfere, there would be a massacre. She was already moving forward even as the twins retreated indoors, noting that none of the guards had dared to make a move against them. It seemed they had no love for Lemkel, either. That only made what she was about to do all the more bittersweet. Taking of Naruto by the back of his scarf, she ruthlessly dragged him back and behind a tree. Will you excuse us for just a second? Remarkably, he didn't struggle until they were out of sight. What are you doing? She hissed, you are going to kill him. To be fair, I am going to kill him. Naruto informed her, a pleasant ring to his voice. I just haven't decided how. Yet, still torn between throwing him across the horizon or just cutting his throat. Oh, or maybe I could just blast his face with a Rasen shuriken. That way there wouldn't be any blood. Naruto. What? It's quicker that way. Must you take interest in every plight you happen upon? She muttered aside. You know we can't take these girls with us when we leave. I understand you're not happy about this, and neither am I, but we cannot go trekking across the wilderness with those twins. Her voice rose, sharpening at his dark look. They won't stand a chance. It is my solemn duty to aid the children of Skyrim. The Dragonbane replied with faux reverence. Only adopting 2 at a time? Fuck that. Besides, given the royal fuck up of your family, you should be more understanding. At the mention of her mother, the Dragonborn bristled in sheer disbelief. How? How dare he use that card? She's D's to me, she muttered. There's nothing to talk about. You don't get to hate her. Naruto's deep, cutting retort rumbled with the power of the Thuum, taking the flickering embers of Isabel's rage and dousing them in icy water. You don't know why she left. You didn't even hear her out. I think that she deserves a chance to tell her side of the story, no? Shut up. If you leave it like this you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Shut up, shut up, shut up, so we should just leave, then. An image of those little girls, their eyes wet with tears, flashed through Isabel's mind and she blanched. Thinking of the lashes their father would undoubtedly give them for slacking made her cringe tenfold. No, she knew in good conscience that she couldn't just turn her back on them. Neither could she simply hand them coin as she'd done for so many other beggars and be done with it. This matter required a more direct approach, and loath as she might be to take it, she couldn't find fault in it. "URK," she managed eloquently. Naruto hummed softly. "And we're done here, sit back and enjoy the show." Faster than she could think to object he spun away from her, spinning on a heel. 7 swift strides carried him across the field and back to his destination. Lemkel must have seen him coming, because he croaked and the commotion started up again. But this time Naruto wasn't having it. His fist shot out, burying itself in the older man's stomach, sending his knife skittering aside even as he reached for his own weapon. "Alright, you. Naruto Warnkles. Last chance. Your daughters are your life. I've got enough problems, so don't go adding to UGACH." That was all he managed as Naruto drove the point of his fingers into Lemkel's throat. Unprepared for the sudden assault on his personage, the man gurgled and staggered back, clutching at his fractured windpipe even as his eyes bulged. But Naruto wasn't finished with him. Not by any means. His hands lashed out like snakes, fingers coiling around Lemkel's throat to haul him into darkness. Then, with them carefully out of sight, he began systematically crushing the air out of his lungs. "I find your lack of good parenting disturbing, sir," he hummed almost pleasantly, uncaring as his praised blotchy face began to purple under his grasp. "These girls were your responsibility. It was your solemn duty as a father to watch over them with their mother gone. You were supposed to protect the two of them. Instead," and here his eyes did burn an angry and molten red, "you whipped them, beat them, abused them. You have failed in your duty. How dare you judge me?" Naruto growled. It wasn't a human sound, that. It seemed to shake the very ground itself. "I'm a shinobi," he intoned, his voice unusually solemn. "I am judge, jury, and when need calls for it, executioner. I name you guilty of everything from not believing in ramen, to abusing your daughters. How do you plead?" What guilty it is. In the end, Isabel contented herself to watch as the blonde put paid to Lemkel's remarks and did, quite literally, choke the life out of him and steal his valuables. When it was done he gave the body over to the guards, none of whom dared to question him, much less speak out against him. Fixing a smile on his face, he made for the door to Lemkel's house, turned the key, and flung it open. A baffled Brit and Sissel awaited him within, Isabel noted with some small pleasure. "Now then," Naruto began good-naturedly, "what say we forget all about this horrible accident and discuss other things, like adoption?" The twins positively beamed. "Oh, yes, please." Isabel gave them a measured look. Hearts for the hopeless indeed. Clever little devils. I am alive. Nearly had to claw my way back from the grave after a nasty bout of pneumonia and bronchitis, but I'm alive and here. Wishing you all a happy July. And to those of you who don't celebrate this holiday, well, happy update day instead. In other news, I'm working on an official update schedule. Yes, it's long overdue. So, in the immortal words Atlas, review, would you kindly? And naturally, enjoy the previews. There be 2 this time, I'm sure you'll love both of them. Once again, to those who would misinterpret, I ask you to remember that the second one is written for comedic effect. Naruto is nobody's bitch, and if he at all acts like one, 'tis only to humor his poor victims, wives. And if this first preview doesn't make you go, "Aw," then you have no soul. No soul, I say. Needless to say, a ton of stuff happens next chapter. And for your viewing pleasure, a little omake as well. Omake. Ayla was silent for a very long time. "What is this?" she asked at last, staring at the ring in her hand. It was a small, silvery thing bearing all manner of shiny stones. She still didn't understand why he was giving it to her. A trinket of some sort? What kind of purpose did it serve? Surely he knew of her disdain for jewelry. Was this his way of apologizing for putting a brat in her belly? "Well, I don't know what your customs are here, but, well, where I'm from, a ring tends to mean." Naruto paused, looking very flustered. "And you told me you wanted me to take responsibility, so." A proverbial light bulb snapped into existence overhead. She grabbed him in a fierce embrace before he could finish. Naruto made a small sound that might have amounted to a squeak. "Lungs, Ayla-chan, lungs, can't breathe, preview. For my first order as High King, I hereby declare ramen the national food, bahahaha." Carlia's brow shot up. Is he being serious? Isabel merely groaned. At this point, I don't even know. There is good and evil in this land to be sure, but there is also gray. Spirits, I don't know what to do with gray. I like gray just fine. Gray saved me. A husband and his wife. Pride's edge. The axe descended mercilessly. Its prey never stood a chance, never saw the falling shadow, much less felt the breeze heralding the weapon's vicious downward arc until it was far too late. A single stroke, then the edge tasted victory. The man paused a moment to take stock of his success, dark eyes surveying the slant of his cut with keen intensity. Then, deeming it satisfactory, he raised the woodcutter's weapon free and gave it a mighty shake. Not a moment later, the severed halves of the log clattered apart and joined the growing pile of their fellows at his feet. By the time they'd fallen, another had taken their place, only to meet the same fate. On to the next, then. His muscles began to buzz pleasantly as he rededicated himself to his task, relentlessly attacking each log as though it were a mortal enemy. And in a sense, they were. For each piece of wood cut, he imagined the face of a foe. Each swing held the power to cleave through hardened leather and steel with ease. Had his target been flesh, the result would have been no different. When his wife had first suggested the idea, he'd scoffed at her. He refused to work the mines out of pride alone. What use could there possibly be in chopping wood when it wasn't needed? Now, he saw the reason in this. It gave him focus. Purpose. A healthy outlet for his darker emotions. Scrubbing his face with the back of a hand, the dark-haired man took a moment to help himself to the flask attached to his hip. It felt good to sweat again. He'd nearly forgotten simple sensations like these. The thrill of swinging a weapon, the strength in his arms, the rush of water down the back of his throat, the steady beat of his healthy heart. When a man thought himself to be indestructible, he took things for granted. It took mortality to make a man take stock of his life. These days he'd learned to live for the simple things, to take joy in every moment. Life was strange when one had no battles to fight. Simple things he'd once paid no heed gave him joy in every moment. Made him feel alive. Brushing a stray bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his good arm, the man stole a glance at the sun and paused just long enough to regain his bearings. Noon, then, he decided. They'd be expecting him home soon perhaps, but surely they wouldn't mind a few more hours yet. Enough to gather the wood up in his cart and haul it home, certainly. Perhaps he'd lend a hand at the mine later afterwards. So he kept at it, losing himself in the simple pleasure of his repetitive task. This wasn't a bad life. Karthwayston was more than just a good place to live in that regard. It was home. He owned this tiny plot of land as much as any outsider who wasn't Jarl could own land, and the people here looked to him for strength and guidance as well as protection. As well they should, argued a tiny shred of pride tucked deep away in his heart. He was the reason the mine still ran. It was he who'd stamped out the Forsworn whenever they attempted a raid, and he who made certain the Silverbloods didn't try to steal their profit out from under them lest they attempt something unscrupulous. If not for him. But that was another matter for another time. After all, he'd always preferred the country to cities. It was easier to forget, here in the hills. His transgressions. His sins. All the wrong he'd done. Easier to pretend it never happened. Besides, he was happy here. Dare he say content? All told, the Reach wasn't a bad place to live so long as you kept your wits about you. Theft was only a threat so long whenever the Silverblood family inevitably reared its head. So long as there was always a weather eye on the road or river, another out for the Forsworn, everything turned out alright. Tenacious bastards those buggers, but not smart, not armored either. A single swing of the man's axe was usually enough to send the fur-clad savages scampering back to the hills with their tails between their legs. Those bold or foolish enough to remain were cut apart like so much firewood and fed to the beasts. For a time, it seemed that would be enough, but these days they were growing bolder, and there came nights where he pondered leaving it all behind, packing up his family and leaving it all behind. He knew they could never kill him, but it wasn't for himself that he worried. It was his legacy. The man knew he could defend his people against mundane threats, but now there was talk of dragons and dragonborn, and mention of a name he'd not heard in an age. A name that sent tremors of rage through his old bones, made him long to wrap his hands around his throat. Strange times indeed. Certain he wasn't being observed by man nor beast, the man snatched up a fresh log from among its brethren in the pile and mercilessly repeated the motion. Once, twice, thrice. He'd just begun to wind up for the fourth attempt when a faint blur of red registered in his peripherals. Momentarily distracted by the newcomer, his attention wavered and his swing went wide, striking a stray stone beneath the stump to draw an angry jolt up his arm and an annoyed grunt from its owner. Said grunt fell on deaf ears as he beheld the one responsible for distracting him. "Papa, Lara, what have I told you, abo oomph?" With a resigned sigh, the man buried his axe into a nearby stump and turned to greet his daughter. He barely made it a step before she threw herself at him, latching onto his legs with all the tenacity a 10-year-old could muster. Admitting defeat, he bent down and mussed her hair with his good arm. Despite appearances, he wasn't annoyed that his child had somehow managed to sneak up on him. If anything, he was proud. Inordinately so. Still, was it so wrong that part of him wished he'd heard her coming? Another sign of the years creeping up on him. Briefly, he paused to take stock of her. She was growing. Quickly, already tall for her age, her head rose well past his waist. He suspected she'd be taller than him by her 13th year. They'd have to buy her new clothes within a fortnight at this rate. She was beginning to outgrow her dresses. He pitied the fool who tried to bully her for her height. Lara took very much after her mother in that regard, leaned toward him in the rest. All dark eyes and long hair the color of midnight. One habit to glance at her to guess her lineage. He could see some semblance of himself in her features if he looked close enough. From her angular face to her pale skin, she was every bit his child and not for the first time. He wondered how he could have created someone so immaculately perfect. "Didn't hear me coming, did you?" she grinned cheekily. "No," he admitted, patting her head. "I didn't. How did you do it?" "Why, Papa," his progeny preened, "that would be telling. A ninja has to keep some secrets. Besides," she grinned, changing the subject, "Mama sent me. She's looking for you." "What did I do this time?" the man groaned. Lara giggled. "Well, after you roasted that last Stormcloak." "One time. I make one mistake, she never lets me live it down." "Maybe next time try not to get caught," his daughter suggested coyly. Ah, this sweet, clever girl. If he ran on willpower, then Lara ran on something else entirely. Youth. Younger, smarter, faster, she was every bit his equal in cunning, and then some, all wrapped up in the body of a little old girl with her prime well ahead of her. Years from now, men would wage wars for the right to court her. He'd expect nothing less. Spirits, she was going to be an absolute terror when she came of age. If she even lives that long, a nasty little voice lurking in the back of his head persisted with pessimistic cynicism. Heedless of her father's thoughts, Lara grinned up at him, placing a fist on her tiny hip. Hey, guess what?" His daughter burst out with a sudden slew of enthusiasm that reminded him she was still very much a child. His father arched a graying brow. "So you have. You know what I mean," Lara pouted childishly. Watch, her brow drew down in an annoyed glower, eyes gliding shut for the span of a single heartbeat. "See, look, they're just like yours." When she opened them again, they were the color of blood, each bearing a single tomo upon their scarlet lens. "URK." The man swallowed thickly and something lurched painfully deep inside his chest. He suspected it wasn't simply his heart, but the thorns of an old pride long forgotten, now tugging at him. It wasn't fair. His daughter deserved far better than this. In another time, another era, she would know the significance of those eyes. She should have been brought up in the ways of the clan, not forced to eke out a living here among forsworn or worse. She should have been the star of her generation, a peerless warrior towering above all. But that would never happen. He would teach her all he knew, and one day he would die, leaving all his knowledge to her. On that day, the shinobi would truly perish, because he was trapped here because of Daddy. Lara tilted her head. "No," he sighed, "it's nothing." Shunting his dreary thought aside, the man clawed his way back to sanity, fixed a smile to his visage and scooped his progeny off the ground, swinging her onto his back with an ease born from endless repetition. Lara squealed in surprise, a delighted giggle leaping from her lips as she landed on his shoulders. "Papa," she managed between bouts of giggles, "I'm getting too big for you to keep doing that." "Nonsense," he declared, starting forward. "Let's not keep your mother waiting." Musical laughter greeted his statement and she tugged at his hair. "Forward," his daughter declared, pointing imperiously. With that, father and daughter set out, the cart and its contents momentarily forgotten. The lumber would keep for a few hours, or so he reasoned. It wasn't as a thief could make good use of chopped logs. And if any such enterprising individual made an attempt, they'd have a nasty surprise awaiting them. Anyone who tried to filch that cart without his express permission was going to find themselves missing more than just a hand. Most of their body, actually. Explosive tags were tricky like that. The man might be old, but he wasn't stupid. In the silence that followed, he let his thoughts drift away and recommitted himself to the moment, content with the silence. The simple pleasure of his daughter's weight pressing against his back. It was during times such as these that he scarcely recognized himself. Had someone told him 10 years ago he would one day settle down and discard his former life, not to mention start a family of his own, he would have slain the man on the spot. Still, here he was, playing the part. Yet some small part of him still rankled at it all. He longed for excitement, for vengeance against those who had wronged him. Sometimes the intensity of his own desires surprised even him. How much longer could he live this life and truly say he was satisfied? How long before? "When are you going to teach me the grand fireball jutsu?" As ever, it was his daughter who saved him, hanging over his armored shoulders. He seized upon her question, grateful for the distraction. "You've been practicing? Every morning?" Lara gushed eagerly. "So, when?" "Soon." He deflected her inquiry with a vague promise. "Then when can I wear armor like yours?" The man nearly snorted. He'd long since discarded that old ramshackle suit he'd arrived with. It was buried deep with all mementos attached to his former life. These days, he preferred the simple black leather armor he now wore. It was by no means the equal of his former attire, but it suited his needs just fine. The idea of his daughter wearing such a suit, of fighting dying, on the battlefield terrified him more than he liked to admit. No, he'd much rather keep her out of war altogether, all things considered. When you're older, as ever, he gave her the same reply, much older. You're no fun. No, the man supposed he wasn't. One way or another, he'd keep her alive. Must you spoil her like that, dear, mama? That familiar voice told him they'd reached their destination in the same instant that Lara simultaneously vaulted off his shoulders. No child her age should be capable of such grace, yet she leapt away from him with an almost fluid ease, bounding the last few steps towards the humble homestead. He trained her well. Would her training keep her alive when he was gone? He hoped so. His wife was waiting for him as he cleared the last few steps, patiently listening to their daughter, but her bright eyes never left him. Indeed, he barely made it another step before she stormed forward and took his face in hand. The kiss that followed was briefly intent, but it warmed him nonetheless. You're late, she began by way of greeting. What took you? Sorry, don't give me sorry. The faintest smile touched the man's face as he pulled her mouth back to his and she yielded for him with a soft moan. He suspected were it not for their daughter standing nearby, she'd rip him out of his armor and have her way with him here and now. Ah, Katria. Even in steel armor she embodied vitality, the curved dwarven bow and quiver at her back were but pale shadows in the face of her majesty. Childbirth had only enhanced her figure. Indeed, it had made her all the more determined to maintain it and thrive. She might not be the prettiest woman alive, nor the youngest, but she was his and he was hers. In the end, that was all that mattered. The man had never given much thought to courtship before the time of their meeting, much less a partner. He'd never felt any urge and there had never been any need. Then he found her, rather, she found him. A woman who would not be denied. A soul who refused to let others trample over her. Someone determined to see the truths of the world, even if she had to single-handedly cut her way through every single Dwemer ruin dotting the world to do it. The former piqued his interests, in the end it was the latter that sealed his fate. Having deemed the notion of courtship foolish long ago, the man had admittedly bungled his first few attempts. What seemed like an endless effort later, her hand was finally his. He'd killed to keep it that way. Itachi was looking for you. She relented at last, reluctantly pulling away when it became clear that he had absolutely no intention of talking any further. Something about the mine. Silver Bloods again? The man sighed, didn't ask. That drew another sigh. Right, then. Keep your bow ready, Lara? Yes, Papa? His daughter brightened. Go inside and wait for us. Lock the door. Ah. One of the few benefits of Karthwasten was its size. It didn't even take a minute to find the disturbance. Unsurprisingly, the mine was indeed the cause. As he neared the entrance, he caught the tail end of a surprisingly heated argument. There was Itachi, flanked by two miners, bickering crossly with a band of men. Heavily armed and well-armored men, he noted, the like of which rarely frequented these parts. Silver Bloods, then. More than last time. Far more. He counted nearly a dozen this time round. Their leader clad in steel plate while the rest of his men seemed to favor hide or steel. Rather alarming considering the humble size of Karthwasten. Years of instinct nearly had him reaching for his axe, but caution stayed his hand at the last instant. I want your sellswords out of my mine, Ader. His old friend was growling, hand hovering over his sword. Watch your tongue, native. Their leader retorted coldly. We'll leave when we're sure there are no forsworn here. Oh, and when would that be, I wonder? The balding man scoffed in open derision. When I sell my land to the Silver Bloods? The interloper took his slight with a small smile. The Silver Bloods have made you a very generous offer for this pile of dirt. I suggest you take it. And I suggest you shove it up your, is there a problem? He chose that moment to interve himself between the two men before they could come to blows or worse. Better that than his wife raining arrows down on him. As satisfying as that sight might be, he had no interest in violence. For the moment, Ader grunted, his eyes flicking idly over Katria, noting her knocked bow. No trouble here. He relented reluctantly. We're just here to keep the mine safe. Shore's bones, I told you there aren't any forsworn, Itachi thundered. The armored man sniffed. We'll see, their piece said. He and his men departed, but not by way of the road. To the man's annoyance they made a beeline for the mine instead, no doubt intending to hold themselves up there. Sanwarich mine wasn't terribly large, but he didn't want to think what sort of trouble they might get into up there. At the very least they'd make themselves at home. At worst, they might try to steal the ore and make off with several weeks of labor, neither of which appealed to him. No, they had to go and soon, before they stirred up mischief. Persistent lot, aren't they? He murmured blackly. There'll be trouble. Madara, my friend. The Reachman sighed ruefully, clapping him on the shoulder. Of course there's trouble. And where there's trouble, you're never far behind. A slight smile touched the man's face. Must be an acquired skill. Trouble for us both, it seems. After all, I'm of the few native sons of the Reach who own land these days. Right, technically your land. Itachi groaned into his hand at the Uchiha's admonishing look. But we agreed not to tell them that. Remember? Better that they don't know about this. Still, it doesn't make us very popular these days. The Forsworn think we're working for the Nords. The Nords think we're working for the Forsworn. Besides, he offered a faint grimace, the Silverbloods already own half of the Reach, and they won't stop until they own all of it. This time, Forsworn attacked the mine. And suddenly all these sellswords show up to help. His tone offered many a hint as to what he thought of their so-called aid, and the aging Uchiha was half inclined to agree with him. We can't have it, I'm half inclined to go in there and… Sighing, Madara pushed a gloved hand through his spiky mane. No, don't do that. I'll take care of it. Just make sure you keep that axe of yours handy. The old warrior raised an arm and followed Ader's footsteps, tracing the man back to the mine. All the while his name echoed after him, Madara. He gritted his teeth as he pushed his way through the mine, ignoring the odd looks he earned from the so-called mercenaries and their ilk. People here were too free with names, and he didn't enjoy hearing his. It stirred something in him, an animal he wanted to keep chained at all costs. Pride held a sharp edge and he needed to avoid it. The alternative meant returning a slow return to his old ways, and that was unacceptable. He'd sooner cut off both his hands than risk becoming that man again. Sure enough, however, he found the mercenary leader on one of the lower levels, helping himself to a barrel of ale. Pig! Kill him! His hand twitched. The axe shivered in his hand. With an effort, Madara stilled his thoughts. Mind if I have a word with you? He began, trying to break the ice. The mine is closed. The mercenary grunted around a mouthful of mead. Get lost. About that. The Uchiha deftly stepped around the man when he tried to look away, blocking his view. I was hoping we could come to an agreement. Helping out Itachi, huh? The mercenary scowled and stood, looking down at him over his long nose. Give me a reason not to plunge a dagger into your chest. In that instant he could have killed him a dozen different ways. It would have been painfully easy, downright effortless. He chose not to. Surely you can see that no one wants you here, he began, choosing the path of reason first. Why not leave? I doubt you're prepared to deal with an angry mob. I rather like our chances, actually, Ader replied smugly. Let them try. You blind, bloody fool. What if I offered to pay your way? Madara offered instead, his patience beginning to fray. Did he truly want to pay this degenerate just to be rid of him? In all honesty, he could. He had a fair bit of gold saved up from his adventures with Kshatriya. It would be difficult to earn back, but surely that was preferable to putting his family in danger. It galled his pride to stoop to such a level, but he swallowed it regardless. Bile burned the back of his throat and he stubbornly choked it down, among other things. Well, what do you say? Ordinarily I might be tempted, but I don't like you. Crossing his arms before his barreled chest, the armored man stood his ground. No, I think I'll stay right here and my men with me. For the town's own good, of course. A muscle jumped in the Uchiha's jaw. He'd had that attitude once. Pride and arrogance made for a heady combination. You thought you were invincible, untouchable. How wrong this one was. Tell you what, Ader countered suddenly, his words sending a cold chill through him. If you want us to leave so badly, why not convince Itachi to sell to the Silverbloods? We'll be more than happy to leave, then. These people will starve without the mine to support them, you know that. Persuasion had never been his strong suit. Hashirama always teased him about that. He might be able to level mountains, but for the life of him he just couldn't some people to see that his way was the right way. A horse could be led to water surely, but it couldn't be made to drink. Force had ever and always been his strong suit. If someone didn't agree with him, they'd simply be made to. But those days were behind him. He was trying to do better. If he dared start down that path again, who knew where it might end? Last time it had taken nothing short of divine intervention for him to change his ways. Would he truly be so lucky a second time? His mind made up, the ancient Uchiha turned to leave. Alright, then. I'll come back tomorrow. Perhaps we'll talk more then. That's right, Ader called after him, his condescending voice all but dripping with derision. Run back to your master like a good dog. Maybe we'll visit your wife tonight. Pay her our compliments. Madara stopped cold. In all fairness, he'd tried to hold back his temper. He really had. He'd given them every opportunity to leave, to back down and walk away. And what had they done with it instead? You. Failures, he hissed out. Yes, that's precisely what they were. Failures. Complete and utter failures. They failed as human beings. They were dogs. No, that was an insult to canines as a whole. They weren't even worthy of being called worms, nor did they deserve the title of the dirt which within the worms crawled. In that instant he found himself reminded of his complete and utter disdain for humanity as a whole. They were scum, and was it not his duty to destroy such scum? It would have been so easy to just give them a push with his eyes and make them leave. The tiniest nudge. These men had no mental fortitude to speak of. A simple genjutsu and they depart without a fuss, retaining no memory of today or the anything that transpired here. Yes, that would be the right thing to do. Merciful, even. Hashirama would have applauded such a thing. A better man would have let the insult slide off him like water from a duck's back and chalked it up to another act of mercy. Unfortunately, Madara he wasn't feeling particularly merciful after that remark. In that instant he saw red and knew there was no hope for any of them. Exhaling heavily, he felt his shoulders droop in resignation. Ater, was it? He sighed. A word to the wise? And what might that be? You don't insult a man's family. With that he spun into a crouch and let the axe fly. It sailed from his hand and arced unerringly across the room to bury itself right in the Nord's skull. Squarely between his eyes, Madara committed the man's frozen face to memory as he watched him tumble to the floor in a bloody would remain forever fixed in horrified realization of what he'd reawakened. He would die knowing in his last moments that he'd doomed not just his fellows, not only the Silver Bloods, not just the Forsworn, but the entire city of Markarth as well. In that single moment of arrogance, he'd altered the very destiny of Skyrim itself. The old man sighed. Growling, Madara rose from his crouch. Before we continue, he began slowly, the words low and deep in his throat. I have just one question for you lot. For perhaps the first time in more than a decade, he allowed the smallest of sinister smiles to grace his visage as he spoke the last words, a touch of killer intent suffusing his voice as though he were talking about something vaguely unpleasant, not contemplating mass murder on a sinister scale. A stiffly terse silence accompanied those deceptively calm words, almost a dozen faces turning towards him in quiet horror. Does anyone want to get out? Unsurprisingly, none dared to answer his most generous request. Just as well, none of you are leaving here alive. Then he flew at them. I am alive. Nearly had to claw my way back from the grave after a nasty bout of pneumonia and bronchitis, but I'm alive and here. Wishing you all a happy July. And to those of you who don't celebrate this holiday, well, happy update day instead. In other news, I'm working on an official update schedule. Yes, it's long overdue. So, in the immortal words Atlas, review, would you kindly? And naturally, enjoy the previews. There be two this time, I'm sure you'll love both of them. Once again, to those who would misinterpret, I ask you to remember that the second one is written for comedic effect. Naruto is nobody's bitch, and if he at all acts like one, 'tis only to humor his poor victims, wives. And if this first preview doesn't make you go, "Ah," then you have no soul. No soul, I say. Needless to say, a ton of stuff happens next chapter. And for your viewing pleasure, a little teaser as well. Preview. So, how are we going to do this, exactly? That depends entirely on you. What, me? I hate to trouble you again, my friend, but there's something else. Enman, he knew the man. Lara was friends with his daughter, Fiora. Do you have to go? Sighing quietly, he brushed his fingers across her face. Guess I was good for something after all. Let the girl go and I'll pretend this never happened. May the gods spit on your bones, Madara sighed. That was your last chance. Thus determined, he discarded his shattered axe and reached for the mace bound to his side. By contrast to his humble axe, this weapon was an ugly, hideous creature. An aberration of nature born from rusted spite, made for the taking of life. Lurid green runes seemed to dance and swirl around its jagged edges, rippling now as its master shifted his stance. Hefting the ghastly mace in his dominant hand, he beckoned with the other. Gloved fingers crooked forward in invitation, and he thought he saw the hesitation lurking behind the man's headdress. Good. Let him feel fear and know his end was upon him. The Briarheart stilled at the sight of that mace. That weapon. Yes, it is. They lunged at each other then, trading blows like madmen. Just how many people are trying to get into your... It's not my fault, ya know, sure as bones it isn't. Records of madness. Madara did not emerge from the mine until dusk. By then the sun had long since reached its zenith. The horizon was darkened to a lovely shade of violet, tongues of fire scrawling across the sky in beautiful relief. Brushing a stray bit of burnt dust from his shoulder, the aging shinobi nevertheless paused at the threshold and took a moment to admire this simple, ethereal beauty unfolding above him. Times like these reminded him to take pleasure in the little things. Be it time spent with his family, chopping wood, or simply taking a moment to watch the sunset. Even the act of cold-blooded murder. A quiet chill ran through his shoulders, pooling in the pit of his stomach. In the end, his anger won the day. The rage always won out in the end. After all these years he thought he had finally managed to master that indefatigable temper of his, only to realize he'd become even more a slave to it than ever. The merest threat against Kshatriya and their daughter was all it took for him to break his promise. He could tolerate many a threat and countless blows, but his family? No, not them. Never them. Now Ater would never speak to anyone ever again, never utter those oily words, never use that forked tongue in the service of his masters. Lara would never know the peril she'd unwittingly been placed in, nor the butchering that followed. Was it so wrong that he'd enjoyed his time with the Silver Bloods, the savage act of slaughtering their mercenaries to a man? Belatedly, he caught himself wondering if he ought to return to Markarth and pay their masters the same courtesy. The Silver Bloods had been persistent before, but now he'd changed the game. Once Ader failed to return, that accursed family would no doubt put the pieces together and send a strong force. Worse, they might get it in their heads to wipe Karthwasten off the map entirely. His name might still carry some weight in that cold city of stone, but the Silver Blood had grown increasingly bold over the last few years. And who would defend thee if it came to that? He was merely one man. Ragnar and Lash could at least fight, as could Katria, but what of the others? If it came to a fight against any sizable force, they'd lose. Perhaps he should pay Thonar and his brother a visit. Would he see those brats, remind them that he wasn't one to be trifled, no. With a ruthless snarl, he shook his head and slammed the lid on that thought before it could eel out of his grasp. A vein pulsed in his forehead and fleeting sense of nausea chased it down. What was he doing here? Why pretend to be someone that he wasn't? Old instincts gnawed at him, stirred by the sheer brutality of his actions here today. The darkness in him had been loosed from its cage at long last, and it did not intend to return quietly. Years of pent-up emotions writhed in him like ugly snakes, demanding release, an outlet. Steeling himself as best he could, he moved on. Ainithach was waiting for him at the foot of the hill, his expression expectant. Schooling his face into a mask, Madara moved to meet him. "Well, they won't be a problem anymore," he said, moving past him. "I thought as much." To his minor annoyance, the Reachman groaned and kept pace with him, his expression pensive as he ran a hand through his fraying hair. "Please tell me you hid the bodies." In a sense. The Uchiha tucked both thumbs in the loops of his belt as he replied with an air of frigid menace. "I gave them 3 chances to walk away. As thanks, they wasted each of them and threatened my family. So I burned them all and buried their ashes in the mine." He plowed onward, heedless of the ghastly look this response earned him. "They want to protect it that badly? They can do so in death. We're better off without their ilk, I say." A small tremor ran through his aging ally before he reined himself in. "Sometimes I truly wonder who you were, before this." Something twisted in the old Uchiha's heart. Better that you don't. Fair enough. It served as a bitter reminder of what he'd done. That his demons, the sins of his past, weren't something he could simply lock away and ignore. He'd failed, fallen, faltered. For all his restraint, when the chips were down, he'd given in to his base desires. To protect his family, of course, but at what cost? He could have easily sent Ader and his men away with a simple glance, but in the end, he'd chosen violence. He'd wanted to kill him the moment he had laid eyes on him. Belatedly, he realized he would always choose violence. The shadows pressed in, old ghosts threatening to stifle him with their presence. A hand settled on his shoulder suddenly, steadying him. "I hate to trouble you again, my friend, but there's something else. It's about Enman." Enman? He knew the man. Lara was friends with his daughter, Fiora. Ainithach must have interpreted his silence for acceptance, because he continued, heedless of the danger. "It's about his daughter, you see." He ventured haltingly at the latter's blank look. "She's been missing for more than a moon now, taken during that last Forsworn raid, but I think we finally—" A dark brow rose. "You know where she is." "How?" To his consternation, the old miner's visage turned pensive. "Well," he managed awkwardly, "you see, a courier came through just this morning, said he saw a girl matching her description in the vicinity of Broken Tower Redoubt." Madara offered little more than a noncommittal grunt. Inwardly, however, his mind had begun to race. Years of reading people laid the truth bare in an instant. Ainithach was lying to him. Not about the girl or location, but how he'd received the knowledge in the first place. Why? It seemed such a strange thing to omit for Madara. Part of him suspected a higher power at work here. Someone or something had granted him the knowledge, and he clearly didn't care to share. Who? Those annoying deities didn't often meddle much in the affairs of mortals, if they existed at all. The Daedra, then? He knew them well enough. More than he cared to. After all, he'd been unfortunate enough to earn the favor of one most foul some time ago. Foolishness. Something foul brushed against his thoughts and he nearly stomped it down out of sheer reflex. If you crave battle, my champion, you need not use this waif as an excuse. Seek it out. Crush the weaklings. Let them be cold before your might as they were before. Shut up. He roared at the voice and it retreated into a corner in his mind, growling. That man was dead, sure as dirt. His fighting and pillaging days were over. He'd been gone for a very long time. Or so he'd thought. Karthwasten was his home. His duty was here, with his family. If Enman's girl was still with the Forsworn, then she was as good as dead, and if she wasn't. Would you leave your daughter to such a fate? Thorns of pride pricked him and held him back. Damn it. I'll do it. His own response startled him. Ainithach nearly collapsed. Truly? Muttering a half-hearted excuse to his ally, the Uchiha stormed back to his house. Old muscles creaked in protest at the sudden movement, a silent reminder that his body was no longer in its prime. His brief bout with the mercenaries had left him sore, but not unable to move. Still, this stiffness displeased him. He'd mean though was out of practice. He'd have to remedy that if he was to undertake this task. The journey ahead threatened to stir old memories best left untouched. Weeds of temptation seemed to tug at his ankles, threatening to trip him up as he walked. When he finally reached his humble abode, he flung the door open. Hard. Katria must have recognized his expression, for she had his armor ready for him almost before he cleared the threshold. She didn't ask where he was going or why, she seldom did. Perhaps she'd been eavesdropping. Perhaps he'd been too loud. Perhaps she simply knew him too well. Whatever the reason, she met him with a smile. I thought you might be his part. Madara accepted the deadly metal wordlessly and allowed her to aid him in donning it, shrugging it over his shoulders. A ring slid over his finger, sending a fresh burst of vitality coursing through his arms. Another joined it on the opposite hand and the persistent ache left his limbs as though it had never been. She slid a silver necklace over neck and he felt a fresh surge of vitality jump through his veins. While he certainly didn't require enchanted gear, he wasn't about to turn it down on pride alone. While his prime might not necessarily be behind him, he was forced to accept the ugly truth that he'd need to start training again lest he lose what little grasp he had on his strength altogether. Speaking of strength, the Silver Bloods might try something while I'm gone, he warned, reaching for the staff above the hearth. If they do, you'll be needing this. Plucking it from the mantle, he lobbed it at his wife, who in turn plucked the ancient weapon out of the air with an ease born of years on the road. Metal armor reacted poorly to electricity, much less a staff of chain lightning enchanted thrice over. He pitied the fool who tried to attack her when she was holding that weapon. You're giving this to me? A slender brow rose in quiet bemusement. Yes, he retorted gruffly. Do you dislike it? Was that a squeal just now? No, not at all. As he looked on his wife twirled it with an ease that belied her skill, and in that moment, the faint light of the hearth cast a shadow on the side of her face. Was it his imagination, or had that smile turned a touch feral just now? A quiet shiver shot down his spine at the sight, not of fear, but of remembrance. Oftentimes he forgot Katria wasn't who she appeared to be either. After all, there was a reason she'd managed to snare him when no other could. She'd been an avid warrior back in her heyday, certainly so during their shared quest for the forge. He'd seen what she did to those who crossed her. Taran Drath had learned that less the hard way. She hadn't been content to prove her former student simply a fraud. After she'd revealed his treachery, she stuck the dark elf full of arrows until he resembled little more than a human pincushion. Woman could be downright terrifying sometimes. Rolling his shoulders, he strode towards a nearby chest, pausing just long enough to retrieve a shrouded parcel within. The gleam of sickly green runes roiling against jagged metal loomed large before his eyes as a corner of the cloth came unbound. One he hastily covered before Katria could peer over his shoulder. He didn't falter for her curiosity, though guilt still clawed at his heart. Part of him wished nothing more than to throw the accursed weapon away, but he simply couldn't bring himself to do it. For all the ill luck it had brought him, it had also helped him to realize who he truly was. What he no longer had any desire to be. Daedric or not, it was still a wickedly effective tool. You're taking that with you? She was giving him that look again, the one that reminded him why he'd fallen for her. I am. The Uchiha replied, placing it in his satchel. Would you rather I leave it here? No, she huffed, embracing him tightly. I never liked the ugly thing. Ugly, am I? You wound me. He feigned a hurt expression. She pinched his cheek in response. You try not to die, dear. Ha. A hoarse laugh burst out of Madara before he could think to hold it back, and he realized with a start that he would actually miss her. Somewhere along the way, she'd become the center of his world. He didn't know what he'd do without her. The notion would have startled him once, all those years ago. Now it merely drew a small smile to his lips. Quietly, he resolved to make this quest a short one. If Anathach had spoken true, he'd be gone for a few days. With luck, he'd be home long before news of Ader's fate reached the ears of the Silver Bloods. It might even behoove him to pay Markarth a visit after all. And if not? His hands tightened into white-knuckled fists. No, don't think that. I won't allow it. Do you have to go, Papa? Perhaps sensing the commotion, Lara had scurried down the stairs to see him off. Nearly half asleep and eyes watery, she swayed on her feet before him, yet still coherent enough to realize what was happening. Madara felt his heart give a fresh lurch against his chest. The last time he'd left on a journey, she had been 5. Old enough to know that he wasn't there, but not why. He'd been gone for months, and it had taken many more to mend the rift that had formed between them in his absence. Now, in the face of her sorrow, he found himself faltering. It had nothing to do with her quivering lower lip, he told himself. No, nothing at all. No tears. He admonished her lightly, patting her head. I'll be home again before you know it. Her face screwed up, trying and failing. But you promised to train me. Sighing quietly, he brushed his palm across hers. Perhaps this will tide you over. This is. A quick sleight of hand was all it took to unfurl his sleeve and deposit the scroll in her now startled grasp. Gaping at the worn parchment, she hastily tugged at the leather cord binding it together and peered at the contents within. Her speechlessness was only justifiable. and made the elder Uchiha preen somewhat. It was pleasing to know he could still surprise his daughter. Wicked smart though she might be, she was still a child and he sometimes found himself forgetting that. Children should be given gifts, shouldn't they? A gift? He refused to elaborate, turning his head away to hide his embarrassed expression. I expect you to have made some progress with it by the time I return, oomph. His words warped into a startled grunt as Lara's head collided with his stomach, no small feat given his armor, while her arms wrapped around his waist. For a moment his back stiffened and he found himself unable to respond. Physical affection was not his strong suit, even after all these years. Katria was one matter, but he still found himself grappling with unexpected displays of empathy. Years ago, if a child had tried to hug him like this, he would have been supremely uncomfortable and pushed them away. Now, awkwardly, he patted her head. A half-hearted smile plucked at his lips. Shining eyes gazed up at him, wet with unshed tears. You'll come back, right? You won't be gone for long, this time? Part of him was tempted to tell her the truth, to admit that he didn't know how long he'd be gone. Yet he couldn't bring himself to do it, for to do so would hurt her. With luck, his journey would be swift and he'd return unharmed. After he dealt with matters. He liked it not, but the Silver Bloods couldn't be left alone. Not after this. He'd bring Fiora back, of course, but then he would have to set out again, and the streets of Markarth would run red and silver with blood. The wheel of fate had been set into motion and once more, he found himself caught up in it. I'll be home soon. Instead, the last Uchiha amused her hair and feigned a smile he couldn't bring himself to feel. Sometime later, as he strode down the open road, a bolt of realization struck Madara. Would you look at that? Seems I was good for something after all. Meanwhile, leagues away, I sense a disturbance in the force. Wham! Isabel didn't take too kindly to Naruto's lip. Judging by the speed with which the recently repaired staff of Magnus descended upon his head to produce a resounding crack. It was a very good blow. An objective part of him mused, solid, swift, yet not so stern as to actually inflict debilitating injury. Even with his superior speed he barely registered it at first. Honestly, he was almost proud of the Dragonborn, if only because she'd genuinely caught him off guard for the first time since they'd met one another. The pain that followed, however. Yeah, not so much. Yelping, the whiskered warrior recoiled and sprang back with a startled hiss. Massaging his temples more out of surprise than any real pain, he shot the glower. Ow, what the hell, Izzy? I was being serious, ya know, I swear I sensed something there. No, absolutely not, freakin' why? Because of this. The Nord flung up her arms to encompass their snowy surroundings, the winds shrieking at them to tear at her words. The plan was to get these two. An accusing finger cast itself at the girls resting on the blonde's broad shoulders. Back to Whiterun, before we returned to Winterhold. Before, not after. Now that damn force field's larger than the town. There's wisps all over the place, and Ankano's been up to shore knows what while we're gone. If I didn't know better, I'd say you were cursed or something. We always go the wrong way whenever you're involved and I am sick of it, do you hear me? Hey, at least we didn't run into a dragon this time. The blonde offered with a Cheshire grin. A stray spark scrawled between her clenched fingers. One more word and I'll roast you. Alright, geez, you're touchy today. Casting off the argument as a lost one, the blonde rolled his shoulders in quiet exasperation and paced away, careful not to jostle his two passengers. We'll drop the kiddos off at the inn before we deal with this, then we'll tear Ankano a new one. Does that satisfy you, your majesty? It does, yes. The dragonborn preened, ignoring the small smile shot her way. Now, perhaps we can finally get down to business. For their part, Brit and Sissel managed to cling to the blonde's broad with an admirable level of strength for girls of their age. With these words, however, Brit wilted. Are we in the way, mama? Ah, I wanted to watch. Of course you're not in the way, sweethearts, he soothed. We just don't want you getting hurt now. Oh, just a minute. Y'all tore shuul. In hindsight, it was almost startling just how quickly the blonde spun on a septum to change his tune. Quick as you please, he pivoted and placed a steadying hand upon his charge's shoulders, steadying them against a fresh gust of wind. Even as he spun, he turned and spat a fresh wave of fire toward an encroaching magical anomaly encroaching upon their tenuous position. It was a strange thing seeing a shout from without rather than within, watching the ethereal wisp recoil and shrivel in on itself beneath the force of the Thuum like a moth drawn to flame. Uncaring of his destructive display nor the trail of flame, the whiskered warrior flashed a pearly smile at their young charges. See, Brit? Once we've gotten you trained you'll be able to just that, but with magic rather than your voice. Hey, that's not fair. Her sibling cried out in mild dismay. I want to do that, too. Now, I'm sure Izzy will be more than happy to give you some lessons. And just like that, he went back to consoling them. Whipped. The dragonborn muttered. PSSH, same as you. What was that? No. A scarred hand waved in mild derision. I didn't say anything. You're hearing things, Izzy. If the lovable buffoon had been a touch more serious with his tone, she might have considered zapping him. As it stood, she had no time to indulge in such frivolous displays of their power. There was work to be done, and it simply couldn't be put off any longer. Who knew what havoc Ankano would wreak if they continued to delay? Still, she wasn't about to let the blonde get the last word. Sparks snarled from her hand as she caught and crushed another writhing wisp in her grasp, leaving naught but a shattered soul gem behind. I swear I'm going to cut you one of these days, she allowed herself a rueful smile. Just like that, the brittle ice between them was broken. In short order they stowed Brit and Sissel away and set out. Ensconced behind the sturdy walls of the inn, neither offered more than a token protest as their protectors waded back into the storm. Wisps fell like mist before them, anomalies toppling against blade and spell alike. In short order they'd cut a path back to the college, where that impenetrable barrier loomed. Isabelle felt something lurch in her at the sight of it. So, how are we going to do this, exactly? That depends entirely on you, Naruto retorted. I'm just here to watch. What, me? Yes, you. The blonde riposted sharply. You can either make up with your mother assuming she's even alive and save the day, or you can be a stubborn sod and push her away again. If it's the latter, I'll just be staying down here. So, which will it be?
Well, wait. A fresh shout caused both Dova to turn as one.
At first they saw nothing in the mist, only gradually did a figure resolve itself. Stumbling, weaving through the storm, she toppled to her knees before them, quivering from head to toe. There. You are, she gasped out, looking as though she might fall over at any moment. I finally caught up you. Do you have any idea how long I've been running? I had to fight my way across half of Skyrim just to get here. Dragons, too. Did I mention the dragons? To the unassuming eye the brunette didn't look like much. A simple if shivering girl clad in simple clothes, from her white blouse to her skirt, right down to the strange goggles hanging from her neck. It was only the ebony blade at her side that lent any credence to her former statement of being a warrior. Isabelle tilted her head a moment, considering the newcomer before them. Even that remark found itself challenged by the girl's slight form and quaking shoulders. Still, under all that snow and ice, she almost looked familiar. And you are? Naruto tilted his head, stifling a small smile. No, wait. You're freezing. Here, have a stamina potion. The girl accepted it with a thankful groan, uncorking the stopper with her teeth and all but ramming the bottle against her lips. As the blonde dusted the snow and ice from her face with a gentle healing spell, the girl's face finally became visible to the baffled Nord. By way of response, the girl turned a murderous glower upon Isabelle. Ask her. Oh, now she remembered. URK. She managed eloquently, forcing a smile. Hello, recorder. You're looking alive. URK? The smaller girl all but imploded. Is that all you have to say, Dragonborn? You nearly got me killed? Sorry, I'm sensing a story there, Izzy. In a startling burst of speed the brunette bolted forward and latched onto the Dragonborn's cloak with both hands. Funny. One wouldn't think someone so slight would be capable of shaking another person so violently, let alone the Dragonborn herself about like a rag doll. They'd be wrong. You have no idea. Shore's bones. She could already feel her ears beginning to burn beneath her cowl, and Naruto wasn't even looking at her. Shame and embarrassment welled up in her in equal measure, and the ground suddenly became immensely interesting. Damn it. She could feel him smiling. That blonde bastard was enjoying this far too much. He'd rue this day. Rue. Slapping the girl's hand away, the bright-eyed warrior mage took a stumbling step back, struggling to make sense of her spinning surroundings. In my defense, I thought you were dead after you fell down that mine shaft. And you're here because, well, the now-named recorder huffed indignantly. I'm glad you asked. I was looking for her. She thrust a damning figuring towards an incandescent Isabelle, and my lost files. Besides, I'm sure I dropped one around here, but... Oh, this is impossible. Then I found you. How am I supposed to arg? In a fit of pique she flung up her arms, nearly braining the latter. Find anything in this storm? I shouldn't even be here. Anyway. Do you have any idea how much trouble she is? Do you? I have an inkling, yes. Naruto raised a hand. Being a dragonbane does that to you. The poor girl balked. Wait. There are two of you now. What have you been up to while I was gone? To their credit, the pair exchanged something of a bemused look between them. We really do attract the oddest of people, don't we? Still, Naruto swore he'd forgotten something. Meanwhile, T lived up to its name in spades. It had been a mighty keep once, a fortress fit for a king. Before something or perhaps someone had shattered one of its towers and left it open to the elements. Now it lay abandoned and forgotten, a moldering ruin crewed by forsworn filth or worse. Still, even its dilapidated defenses were nothing to sneeze at. While he admittedly hadn't brushed up on the lore of this land, Madara knew danger when he saw it. Though the trail had led him here, he found himself in no hurry to engage its defenses. One should never judge a book by its cover after all, and this ruined fort was no exception. The archers had a fine view of him from the road, so stealth was out of the question. "Well, then," he rumbled, rolling his shoulders, "shall we get started?" It felt somewhat refreshing to walk through the front door. Just like old times. Unfurling a scroll of detect life from his pack, Madara felt a rush of warm air stir the wind as he reached for the worn arch. Too little, too late. The unlucky archer never found her mark's neck. Instead he contemptuously snatched her crude arrow out of the air and flung it back at her to drill against her throat. The forsworn woman collapsed with a bloody gurgle, clutching at her neck even as she fell. Another raised their bow to knock a fresh shot, only to find a spice of ice lodged against their gut. Bereft of his balance, the forsworn toppled from the parapets to the road below, his body landing in a tumbling heap. Crimson eyes blazed down at the man. "I'll say it now. Beg all you like, but you won't receive any mercy." The would-be warrior raised a hand to ward off the axe and found it hacked off with his head besides. By then the scroll had done its work. Heat suffused Madara's active eyes in the form several red blurs registered before his vision. One, smaller than the rest, lurked at the top of the tower. "Got you." Rather than bother with the door, the old Uchiha chose the road less traveled. One could even say it wasn't a road at all. Running at the nearest wall in a dead sprint, he thrust out with his axe, hooking it against the wall with enough force to wedge its edge against it. Metal shrieked against the mortar, but it gave him the leverage needed to fling his legs upward. Once they secured themselves against the hardened wall sure as stone. Scarce had he secured himself a foothold than he sprang up the wall itself using his handily created foothold and a sparse application of chakra to spin up at another archer before they could draw a bead on him. He committed their baffled visage to memory, then proceeded to hack it off. Priceless. Alighting upon proper solid ground that wasn't a wall at last, Madara found himself besieged. He sidestepped the first and opened her throat with his knife, never once missing a beat. By then the second was upon him in a whirl of crude blade, only for one such blade to find itself diverted against his stomach. Gurgling in scarlet surprise, the forsworn looter forsook his crude axes to clutch at the gaping tear in his belly. No sooner had he done so than a throwing knife slammed home into his open maw, ending his pitiful gurgles forevermore. "Is that all?" Spreading his arms wide, the ancient warrior raised his hands to greet the next assault. "I expected more." A bolt of crude lightning arced through the air, only to find itself stifled by a wall of burning blue bones. Ah, Susanoo. He wasn't sure he'd be able to rely on it after going without for so long. It heartened the aging warrior to know he wasn't as rusty as he feared himself to be. A thought flicked the skeletal hand outward, crushing two more beneath its rigid fingers before they could escape. He felt nothing for their deaths. If anything, their deaths rejuvenated him. He gloried in the combat. All the tension of the last 10 years burned out of him as he fought on, ripping and slashing and tearing at anyone fool enough to attack him. It was enough to make a man laugh, really, until the axe broke. With a shuddering crunch the old weapon finally gave up the ghost as he embedded it in the side of particularly stubborn forsworn, its hilt shattering against a particularly brutal blow as he crashed. Someone laughed, perhaps thinking that was his only weapon. It was not. Regarding the ruined haft with a critical eye, the Uchiha spun and flung the cracked head at the nearest raider. An unlucky woman found herself bearing a skull full of metal. She dropped like a sack of potatoes. Her companion had half a heartbeat to realize his peril before Madara ran snatched up a fallen blade and rammed its ruined spoke through their eye. Sparing a forlorn look for his shattered weapon, the Uchiha shouldered through the next door he found. Quite suddenly, he found himself face to face with his objective. A briarheart awaited him beyond, looming large before a cage. Though the man's back was turned, he spied the crimson dress of a little girl. Her shriek of fear confirmed his suspicions. Against all odds, Fiora awaited him in that cell, one that would likely cost the girl her life if he didn't speak up. He coughed. "Let the girl go and I'll kill you quickly." The poor man spun as though he'd been struck, brandishing a cold of cone in one hand, an ebony dagger in the other. Ah, so that was why she'd screamed. He was hideous even with that hideous hide helm concealing his visage, a half-stitched wound in his chest exposing his false heart. As Madara looked on it shifted, pulsing wetly in the open wound like a great gaping sore. This was man. This was a product of the Hagraven's foul sorcery, a gross mockery, a parody of all that was holy and good in this life. "May the gods spit on your bones," the briarheart rasped. Madara sighed. That was your last chance. Thus determined, he discarded his shattered axe and reached for the mace bound to his side. By contrast to his humble axe, this weapon was an ugly, hideous creature. An aberration of nature born from rotten hate and rusted spite. Made for the taking of life. Lurid green runes seemed to dance and swirl around its jagged edges, rippling now as its master shifted his stance. Hefting the ghastly mace in his dominant hand, he beckoned with the other. Gloved fingers crooked forward in invitation and he thought he saw the hesitation lurking behind the man's headdress. Good. Let him feel fear and know his end was upon him. Yes, at last. A dark, exultant cackle swelled through his mind, loud and large. The Briarheart stilled at the sight of that mace. How did you come by that weapon? You'll never know. They lunged at each other then, trading blows like madmen. I am alive. Nearly had to claw my way back from the grave after a nasty bout of pneumonia and bronchitis, but I'm alive and here. Wishing you all a happy July. And to those of you who don't celebrate this holiday, well, happy update day instead. In other news, I'm working on an official update schedule. Yes, it's long overdue. So, in the Immortal Words Atlas review, would you kindly? And naturally, enjoy the previews. There be two this time, I'm sure you'll love both of them. Once again, to those who would misinterpret, I ask you to remember that the second one is written for comedic effect. Naruto is nobody's bitch, and if he at all acts like one, 'tis only to humor his poor victims, wives. And if this first preview doesn't make you go, "Aw," then you have no soul. No soul, I say. Needless to say, a ton of stuff happens next chapter. Now, for your viewing pleasure, a little teaser as well. Previews. I would very much appreciate if you let me out of this cage, my friend. A werewolf? Me, thanks, but no thanks, the fox is enough. Nice crown. Think I'll keep it. Have you gone mad? Just a little. Now then, I believe we have some unfinished business with the Dark Brotherhood. I swear to sigh this, if I hear that jester cackle one more time. This is the worst idea. You're the absolute worst. At least the town isn't on fire, Alduin sneered. So you return, mortal, not alone, buds, let's make some more stories. Sarana. Hearts of Stone humanity was a strange concept, all things considered. In all her years, Sarana had never dwelt much on such thoughts. Rather, she simply hadn't been afforded the time nor the luxury. No, she couldn't afford it. Tugged in one direction by her father, another by her mother, and a third still by that damned prophecy during the later years of her life. It was something of a miracle that she'd turned out remotely sane. Power took precedence, Harkon had said. After that wretched day, there had been no time for filial bonds or attachments, much less any form of endearment on his part. Then that prophecy had consumed her father, and in a lesser sense, her mother as well. The rest, as they say, was history. Back then she'd tamped such notions down, buried them in blood and sleep. All in the vain hopes that they'd eventually become a mere afterthought. Then someone stumbled upon her resting placing, and the ugly truth was violently thrust upon her once more with her reawakening. Confronted with the ugly realization of her heritage, Harkon's daughter found herself at something of a crossroads. She could fall to her sins or surpass them altogether, become a better person and try to make up for her sordid past. Alas, the latter was easier said than done. Loath though she might be to admit it, Sarana was not a good person. Compared to most of her kind, she might be kinder than most, but she wasn't without her own flaws. While she might not consider mortals to be cattle, she didn't hold them in terribly high regard either. The choice few genuinely earned her trust or affection. In one case had done so through extraordinary means and could be counted on the fingers of one hand. As to the rest, she felt indifferent at best. Unlike her parents, pride and power held little sway over her thoughts. She found herself drawn to eccentrics and other curiosities, and while she might not be overly fond of werewolves, she could at least tolerate them. Her present situation was, in a word, complicated. For one who had been a champion of the night for so long, it felt decidedly strange to play at being something she was not. On one hand, a part of her reveled in living a normal life, away from the endless intrigues of the court. Arwen was a delight to look after. The girl was sharp as a tack and fiendishly clever. In time, she'd be a veritable force of nature. For what felt like the umpteenth time since they'd adopted her, the vampire quietly resolved to raise her daughter as best she could. She'd be a better parent to her than her own absentee mother had ever been. Still, Sarana knew better than to lower her guard completely. The situation at Castle Volkihar might yet be volatile for eons to come, yet it couldn't be left unresolved. Not with scheming toads like Vingalmo and Orthjolf roaming about. There would be a struggle to fill the power vacuum left behind by her father, to be sure, but once it was filled, there would be a reckoning. For this, if no other reason, she abstained from seeking a cure for herself. Her vampire blood might be a hindrance, but it was all that prevented her former compatriots from descending on Whiterun in a bloody vengeance. Perhaps Naruto didn't realize that, or perhaps he did, in which case she understood why he'd taken to the road again, thus drawing their wrath towards him and away from her. Perhaps that was why he'd coaxed Farkas into keeping an eye on her during his absence. Which led to the pure-blooded vampire's current predicament. Farkas, planting both fists against on her hips, the slight woman fixed her protector with a smoldering glare beneath her hood. You are not going to maul Belethor, and that's final. For a fleeting moment the lycanthrope looked as though he would storm back into the greasy little man's store to tell him off, then thrash him besides. It was only a calming hand on his thick wrist that drew the Nord down from what looked to be a mounting fury and brought him down to earth. He stiffed you on that trade. The towering warrior protested gruffly, dark eyes narrow, Made you pay twice what that necklace was worth. You got a raw deal. Sarana arched a slender eyebrow, fingered the gold necklace of fire resistance now draped around her neck. She bought it solely on impulse, thinking it might be better to possess some manner of protection against the element that her body so rightly feared. Yes, she remarked with a long-suffering sigh, but as a result, I learned to be careful in my dealings with him. Besides. A smug Arwen sauntered out of the shop with a jaunty wave, deft fingers wriggling happily. In one hand she clutched a freshly pilfered sweet roll, the other slipped a deceptively small purse of coin into one of the many leather bandoliers on her personage. To Sarana's enhanced senses, the soft jingle of coin was almost painfully obvious. Huh. Clever girl. No guard would ever think to challenge a child, even a half-elf, much less one under the express protection of the companions. Secretly, she suspected the sticky-fingered caster knew this. That, or Carlia had taught her more than a mere sleight of hand. Surely not, there hadn't been any time for that. Had there? I'm pretty sure she just got my coin back with some interest besides. HRRMPH. Thankfully, Farkas didn't challenge her that. Catch. With a silent smile the little half-breed flicked a pair of rings in their general direction, one gold, the other silver. Farkas snatched the latter out of the air with a speed that belied his size even as the former settled nimbly on Sarana's own pointer finger. She recognized a ring of regeneration when she saw one and accepted it gladly. For his part, the shifter regarded his gift with something akin to trepidation. Was he afraid of the silver? It was enchanted of course, and as such wouldn't be able to harm him, but it was almost amusing to see someone so large afraid of such a small bauble. What's this? Two-handed enchantment. Arwen replied in short speak. Thought you'd want it. Something in that craggy visage softened. You're not so bad after all, pup. The girl preened proudly and Sarana nearly caught herself smiling before it was too late. An honest life was well and good, but did it have to be so sane? While the sun might not entirely hold her in its sway as it did lesser creatures of the night, it still inconvenienced her. Even with her hood she could feel the heat beating against her back. Slightly less now that she'd finally acquired the necklace and the proper enchantments, yet ever present regardless. She wanted to make some more stories of her own, knowing there was still so much out there, yet here she was, trapped under the watchful eye of Farkas. For one to understand Farkas they would have to know him as she did. Though the Nord might be a great mountain of a man indeed, he loomed over many in the hold. He was surprisingly kind-hearted and soft-spoken for one of his stature. He seldom raised his voice, but when he did, others listened. As well they should, for he stood clad in burnished steel armor, with arms wrapped in corded muscle, the better to wield the mighty great sword strapped to his back. Of course, it helped that his scent was decidedly muted, not nearly as overpowering as Vilka's, Skjor, or Ayla. Speaking of the latter, as they ascended steps to the Cloud District she caught sight of the wild redhead near Jorvaskr. Though clad in simple clothes and bearing an increasingly large baby bump, the woman still favored the bow. Indeed, her pregnancy did precious little to slow her down at all. As Sarana looked on, Ayla drew an arrow from her quiver and pulled the string taut. Even as she thought to question what the huntress was doing, the Nord loosed a single shot into the air. Not a heartbeat later a hawk plummeted from the sky and crashed down at her feet. Plucking the bird from the ground with a triumphant smile, the huntress grinned.
Arwen squealed and bolted towards her with a delighted cry.
That was amazing. Me next, Farkas whizzed bad shot. Keen eyes found his as they approached. Think you can do better, Ice for brains? No thanks. Give me a sword any day. To his credit, the warrior let the pointed jab roll off his shoulders like water on a duck's back. 3 swift strides carried him to her side, where he laid a heavy hand on her shoulder. Tisking softly, Ayla turned and swatted at him, though lacked the strength to make him move. Then her gaze shifted to young Arwen, the little she-elf eyeing her bow with frightful intensity. As though sensing a kindred spirit in the young girl, the huntress gave her a long, appraising look. After a moment's hesitation, she offered her the quiver with a questing tilt of the head. You're Naruto's pup, right? Care to try your luck? Arwen nearly turned incandescent with joy. Can I? Do you know how to shoot? Little, the girl admitted shyly. The bow sailed her grasp with a harsh thud. Show me what you can do, then, Ayla commanded. Huh. Farkas remarked as Arwen skidded past them. Can't remember the last time you let someone borrow your bow. Have to keep sharp while I can. The redhead replied with a defeated huff as they watched her fumble with the weapon.
Sure knows I'll be soft enough once I have this whelp to take care of. Her hand fell to caress her stomach and that sight brought on a fresh ache and Sarana fought down a grimace despite herself. The sight of her served as a painful reminder that, while Naruto would doubtlessly return to Whiterun sooner or later, it might not be for her. She'd known of course, but somehow, hearing the words hurt more. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Something caught in her throat, a familiar burn that had nothing to do with the perpetual thirst she battled every day and panicking, she muttered an excuse as she darted back the way they'd come. An irrational fear had taken hold of her, and try as she might, it would not be denied. Taking the steps two at a time, she slammed past an irate Nazim, uncaring for the outraged squawk he flung at her back. Watch where you're going, you petulant whore. Anger reared its ugly head then.
Slender fingers flicked in a subtle unnoticed whip of her wrist and turned the steps to ice beneath his feet for a few precious moments.
It was enough. With a startled shriek that had no business coming from a grown man, the arrogant redguard lost his footing and flailed precariously on the stone steps in a vain attempt to reclaim his balance. It was not to be. Even as Sarana marched back to breeze home, the surly farmer succumbed to his one-sided battle with gravity and tumbled head over heels down the steps, his fanciful clothing doing nothing to protect his face. Good. She hoped he broke his neck. Judging by that sickening crack she'd just heard now, she suspected he had.
She'd nearly made it home, and didn't that thought fill her with bittersweet regret when she encountered the courier.
Rather than the harried young man she'd become accustomed to during her stay in Whiterun, this was someone new. Someone different.
She didn't recognize him at a glance, but something about him held her gaze. He seemed to be an imperial of sorts, yet his features were almost too handsome to be real. Dark hair and darker eyes. There was a distinct light to his gaze that seemed almost familiar, a palpable confidence that bordered on outright arrogance. But more than that, he held a distinctive scent, one she recognized but couldn't name, lurking in the back of her mind. An alarm rang out against her thoughts, one she reluctantly shoved aside as the messenger sketched a strange bow before her. Here, a letter for you, my lady. He purred, handing her a sheaf of worn parchment. Your hands only.
Oh, thank you. Baffled, Sarana reluctantly accepted the letter from him. You're new.
Mordred, my lady. The Imperial smiled softly. For what it's worth, I offer my condolences. Condolences? With a frown she glanced at the latter. I don't understand, what are?
All at once, the pureblood recognized the strange smell that had eluded her. Realization crashed down on her in a scalding wave.
Vampire. When next she looked, Mordred was nowhere to be found. Not a trace of him remained, as if he'd simply ceased to exist altogether. The sole sign of his presence in Whiterun was the thin piece of paper he'd handed her, bound by a seal of crimson wax. So red, it might well have been blood. Perhaps it was, she thought with a shudder. The seal of Castle Volkihar stared smugly up at her until she slashed at it with her nails. A cold breeze ripped through the late afternoon, chilling her to the bone. She suddenly felt terribly, horridly alone despite Adrianne's presence only yards away at the forge. With trembling hands, she unfurled the document. She knew the handwriting all too well. It leapt out at her from the parchment like a thunderbolt, even as her stomach roiled. Lady Sarana, it has come to my inescapable attention that you've thrown your lot in with the mortals and are living like a commoner in Whiterun. Disgraceful. Out of respect for your bloodline if nothing else, I will give you a fortnight to return home with the Elder Scroll. Do so, and I may refrain from burning that miserable hold to the ground. Fail to heed my warning and suffer the consequences. It would be such a pity if something were to happen to that adopted daughter of yours, wouldn't you agree? Vingalmo. Something stilled in her soul and the letter shattered into 1,000 frozen shards in her hand. Anger sprang to life in her dead heart, but hers was a cold one. A lake of ice that quelled all emotion and turned her dread into a glacial pit of hate. If the letter's purpose had been to instill her with fear and indecision, it had backfired spectacularly. Had the letter found her in any other state, she would have flung herself into despair. Now, a scarlet veil draped itself over her vision and she nearly transformed on the spot. Only a thin leash of restraint prevented her from doing so. That fraying tether of sanity somehow held her back from giving into her own bloodlust and descending upon Castle Volkihar in a rage. With her father gone, none of them would be any match for a vampire lord, but that wasn't the impetus that drove her onward. How dare they threaten Arwen? How dare they shatter her peaceful life? How dare they think themselves above her, beyond her? Before she could truly fling herself over the edge into madness, a hand closed around her shoulder. Startled, she rounded on what she assumed be her attacker, fangs flashing in a hiss. Hey, there, a rough voice yelped in surprise. Don't even think about it. She tried to muster words, but all that emerged was a snarl. Caught in the throes of her wrath, she almost failed to recognize Vilkas's startled face. Even then she nearly lashed out at him. Instead, a grip like iron snared her wrist before she could claw his eyes out, and she found herself hoisted off the ground by said limb as though she weighed no more than a feather. Gentle yet firm, he held her there, his stoic expression betraying not so much as a hint of the exasperation he must be feeling. Heat seared the back of Sarana's neck in a rare combination of anger and shame. She felt like a little girl all over again, and a small part of her mused that this must be what it felt like to have an older sibling. Ironic, given she was easily centuries older than the weathered companion. Easy, now. The lycanthrope soothed. I'm not going to hurt you. Have you calmed down? Perhaps sensing the rise of her temper, his expression softened infinitesimally. That letter you destroyed just now, it brought ill news, I take it? Not trusting her tongue, Sarana offered a stiff nod. With a grunt, Vilkas lowered her to her feet. A rueful glare was the reward for his restraint. Even then Sarana didn't entirely trust herself to speak. Her nerves were scraped raw, the cold blizzard of wrath had melted back into boiling wrath and she felt helpless against it. In that moment more than ever she wished Naruto hadn't left Whiterun. He no way laughed at her fear and said something witty to make her feel better. Yes, the blonde would have had absolutely no qualms against taking the fight straight to Vingalmo and what remained of her father's sycophants, but Naruto was not here and she found herself at something of a loss once again, lashing out with harsh words. "Why are you here?" she challenged. The shifter's nose curled in derision at her remark. "I thought I caught something foul on the wind." At her admonishing glare, a grim smile spread across his face. "You, of course. It seems I was right to keep an eye on you. If it's vampires threatening the hold," he ground his fist against an open palm, "we would be honored to help you root them out." A strange emotion bubbled up in Sarana then, stinging at her eyes. "Why?" she croaked. "I don't understand. Why go so far for someone you barely even know?" The laugh, when it came, nearly floored the solitary vampire. "You might not be a companion, but you're important to the fox and he's been claimed by Ayla. As far as I'm concerned, that makes you one of us by default. As such, you are under our protection." After a moment's pause, he quirked a brow. Even as a vampire, he didn't bow, not Vilkas, for he would yield to few save Kodlik himself, but he did incline his head in respect. "If someone threatens you." Something savage gleamed in his gaze. "Then they threaten all of us. When Naruto returns, we'll gladly lend you our swords." "That's very kind of you." She couldn't bring herself to muster anything else, such was her shock. Was this Naruto had meant when he spoke of friends? She'd never understood the concept of bonds that he'd always espoused. Indeed, she'd only just begun to allow others into her life. This was all too much, too soon. She needed time to think, to get her affairs in order. The very notion that anyone other than Naruto would lend her their blade in common cause to help her had seemed ludicrous. Yet it was true, and that thought lingered. When Naruto returns, Little did she know that the whiskered warrior was facing something far worse than vampires even as they spoke. Meanwhile, was this how it felt to be a god? Truly, Akano felt that it must be so. With the eye of Magnus hovering before him, cast adrift like some great gilded god, he felt invincible. Untouchable. Mana thrummed through his veins like the drums of a great hunt out for blood, a steady pulse pounding in his ears with each passing moment. He felt as if he could unmake the world with a thought, ferret out the very truth of the universe itself. All of creation bowed to his whim. He was beyond the college's pathetic attempts at magic. With each passing moment his might grew, his rivals in the Dominion would make way for him after this. For if they did not, he would destroy them just as he would this wretched excuse for a mage's guild. Really, he was doing the world a favor by wiping it from the face of Tamriel. Something shuddered at the edge of the barrier and he turned a heartbeat too late as the gate crashed open. Who dares? In the next instant a trio of Daedric arrows feathered his right knee. Fiery pain bloomed through the protective shroud sheathing his body as his body buckled against it. By some miracle he managed to raise a ward in time to deflect the next volley despite clutching at his wounded appendage. Even then the deadly missiles sank several inches into the fresh pool of his mana before he managed to force it up and away. What trickery was this? He'd already slain the archmage. With Savos gone, there should be no one else capable of breaching the barrier without Magnus's staff, much less wound him with those accursed arrows. Straining his gaze, he beheld the source of his woes and something in him quailed at the sight. One he knew as that irritable student from the college, if only by her wild gaze and dark hair. He blinked through the haze of pain. So that must be the staff of Magnus in her hand. Behind her loomed a young man with fierce blue eyes, blonde hair and whiskered cheeks. He, at least, proved recognizable, if only from the reports. Dragonbane. But then who were the other two behind him? One seemed a bard of sorts, but the other wore armor that undoubtedly matched his own. Twang. Face to face with a warrior who devoured dragons, he failed to notice the arrow kissing Carlia's bowstring until it slammed through his shoulder. Once more the eye of Magnus failed to protect him. This time the bolt sent him spinning to his feet, flinging off a haphazard paralysis spell as he went. By some stroke of ill luck he missed and struck the wall instead. By then blades were drawn and battle was joined. "This is the worst idea." The nameless one groaned, brandishing an ebony sword. "You're the absolute worst. At least the town isn't on fire, this time." Speaking of fire, he grinned at him, then, revealing far too many teeth. "Are you gonna stand there gaping all day, or are you going to attack us?" The jab slid under his guard, pricking the elf's pride. "I expected more for the Thalmor." "You knave." A storm leapt from his fingertips, fueled by the unholy power of Magnus's eye. The others flung themselves aside, but the Dragonbane didn't even deign to dodge. Rather, he took the spell head on, much to Akano's delight. Every muscle in his body clamped down as sparks scrawled across his twitching shoulders, but rather than fall, that crazed grin only grew in intensity. Then he inhaled sharply, and the spell guttered out like a candle in the wind. Rather, it found itself devoured, swallowed whole by the blazing cloak sheathing his body. Huh, neat. He mused, massaging his jaw. Seems that tricks works on spells, too. Made my tongue a little numb, though. Got anything else, elf? You. How did you? A flicker of motion in his peripherals was his only warning. You. A feral hiss slithered through his ears. The next he knew, a clawed hand wrapped around his face, firm fingers hoisting him from the floor. Do you have any idea how much trouble you caused? What we had to go through to get this damn staff. Flailing, he narrowly managed to break the Dragonborn's hold before she could crush his neck. Ankano bristled. Pride demanded recompense for such temerity. In his arrogance, he never once thought to consider that they were baiting him, trying to draw him out. Drawing himself up to his full, towering height, he glared down at the impudent creatures who dared defy him. I am a god, you dull creatures. I will not be, Fus Aro Da. The dragons roared. There could be no other description for the sheer wall of sound that buffeted him from his perch and cast him to the ground. The world shook as though caught in the throes of a great quake, scrambling backward like a drunken crab. The high elf attempted to draw on the Eye of Magnus in a desperate bid to bolster his own flagging reserves, only to hear the fresh intake of breath once more. Something in him quailed. Another shout? So soon? Surely not. Yal Tor Shul. The Dragonborn spoke and flames blossomed across him like the tongues of a great wyrm, bringing with it pain never ending. Instinct flung him to the floor in a frantic attempt to douse the flames. By the time he realized his mistake, it was already too late to correct his course. Faux cra din. Now it was ice that became him, or rather, his very flesh turned to brittle shards of frozen glass. With a roar he ripped himself free, arching his back to draw upon the full might of the eye, heedless of consequences. The fools! He'd repay every indignity inflicted upon him tenfold. A cone of ice burst from his fingers and struck the bard head on as she leapt at him. In the same instant he summoned a bolt of lightning and drove it through the detestable dark elf's torso. Rather, that had been his intent, but somehow he damnably missed again, instead scoring an angry red line against the enchanted leather of her armor. Then the dragons shouted anew and the battle ended. Vengar Nun caught him unprepared, flinging him toward the ceiling. Bereft of gravity, he found himself at the mercy of the winds. Yet even as he marshaled his mana to counter this threat, he realized his own peril. Below him the storm had cleared, opening passage for a golden missile, one even now streaking towards him. Fire sprang to his fingertips, but too slowly. Tidklol. Time itself unspooled like sand in a glass, all the world dragging to a crawl as the Dragonbane shouted at the world and bent it to his will. Too late, Ankano saw the ground rushing up at his face. Felt a hand latch onto his heel and whip him forward, splintering his visage even as he flew. A sword punched through his robes and buried itself against his stomach. Agony twisted the world back into focus and he gasped out against it, only for the blade to find his gut and wrench painfully against his innards. This was death, he realized. He was falling, tumbling through the air into darkness. Though he fought and flailed against it, he found himself power to escape that pit. With a snarl, he found himself dropped, not just to the floor, but the void itself. His last sight was of those eyes, those terrible red orbs. One final mockery graced his ears. Puny god. I am alive. Nearly had to claw my way back from the grave after a nasty bout of pneumonia and bronchitis, but I'm alive and here, wishing you all a happy summer. And to those of you who don't celebrate it, well, happy update day instead. In other news, I'm working on an official update schedule. Yes, it's long overdue. So, in the immortal words Atlas. Review, would you kindly, and naturally, enjoy the previews, there be two this time. I'm sure you'll love both of them. Once again, to those who would misinterpret, I ask you to remember that the second one is written for comedic effect. Naruto is nobody's bitch, and if he at all acts like one, 'tis only to humor his poor victims, wives. Needless to say, a ton of stuff happens next chapter. Now, for your viewing pleasure, a few teasers as well. Opening parenthesis ... Previews. Something lurched in Sarana's chest. Thirsty. The largest of them, an orc, bristled. Huh, what did she just say? Idiot. Don't get close. A thought rendered her body incorporeal. Her body dissolved into so much mist that it seemed to swarm over the silver hand. Too late, they felt the touch of death. The nearest felt the brush of fangs against his neck for no more than an instant. The furthest suffered the express misfortune of seeing the pureblood come for him, claws bared. As though something in her had died, so too did she feel born anew. She had matters of her own to attend to. Jarl Igmund was not accustomed to entertaining guests. Certainly not the armed and armored sort that dared to approach the throne. Not with the forsworn menace at an all-time high. You speak to Igmund, son of Rolfder, Jarl of Mark.
He choked on the words when he saw him. Brandishing his mace, Madara stood before the throne.
I've come to bargain. Even in lass. Had he a hat, she supposed he might have tipped it.
Heard about you and your honeyed words. A guard snorted as he strode past. A dark brow arched. Excuse me. Hey, there. Care for a drinking contest?
Ha, I'll drink you under the table. Izzy, I don't think that's a.
PFF'd. Lie wait. Hey. No, no, no. The fancifully clad madman ranted. Not you. You're so boringly sane. I wanted the other one. You seem to misunderstand.
I'm not a good person. I'm the bad guy. I've come to bargain. Second interlude. The attack came in the marketplace. Madara had only just stepped foot through the great gate of Markarth when he glimpsed the keen sheen of sunlight dancing off drawn metal.
Keen eyes caught it immediately and he grew tense, years of vicious instinct and bitter battles drawing his body tight as a bow. He didn't want to see it. If anything, he wanted to ignore it and continue on his merry way. In another life he might have just done that. Simply turned his back and let the murder transpire uninterrupted. Even now he was more than a little tempted. What business was this of his? He had things to do. He couldn't well play hero for these folk. Thankfully time and death his first, at any rate, had bruised both his pride and ego.
There was a little girl not half a step behind him and he had a temple to take her to. Fiora's parents had been most insistent when they learned she was to be next Sibyl of Dibella or what have you.
They'd asked him to keep her safe. He didn't much trust in gods, but her parents had been adamant, and away they had went. His first duty was to her, not to random strangers on the street. Still, to just leave the poor sod alone and let him stab that woman, even when doing so would likely terrify the girl he'd taken charge of, whatever this was. His conscience pricked at him again.
Bugger. With a ponderous, long-suffering sigh, the aging Uchiha exhaled with the air of one who was accustomed to such thing and placed a hand over his ward's eyes. He could clearly see the owner of said knife approaching his target now, weapon clearing its crude sheath at his side. Close your eyes, cover your ears, and count to 10, kid, he commanded. Don't open them until you've gotten that high. K. Credit where it was due, the little one listened immediately. Good girl. 1. Her obedience freed him to attend to matters. 2. A man cocked his arm back and advanced upon an unsuspecting woman. 3. A man never saw the silent shadow loom up behind him, eyes blazing like twin royal rubies. 4. A man floundered as the Uchiha plucked the dagger from his hand and savagely slashed him across the face.
5. It felt like carving a holiday ham, for all the murderers ranting and raving, his was a clean cut through and through. A single sharp slice that slid through an eye and hacked off half the man's nose in a single devastating arc. His target forgotten, the would-be killer clamped one hand to his face and recoiled with a sharp shriek. He scarcely had time to scream before Madara whipped the dagger back around in a reverse grip to bury it in the would-be murderer's chest. Incredibly, that didn't drop him. The man just ripped the knife free and slashed wildly at him, uncaring as he bled out. 6. Not a bad attempt, Madara surmised, swaying around the savage's swing with a keen eye. Next time try not to shout before you stab someone. It gives you away. Not that you'll get it next time, mind. 7. In the next instant he drew the mace of Molik Balg and bashed its spiked maw against his attacker's face. 8. Still some life left in him. He might actually get back up. 9. This time, he beheaded him to make sure that didn't happen. 10. Swiped from his shoulders, the man's head struck the street and bounced away. Tumbling, a guard fainted dead away at the sight. Poor Sod just collapsed. Boneless. You'd think he'd never seen a murder before. He gave the body a kick for good measure as he waltzed back to his knees. In hindsight, he could have plied the man for answers, trapped him in an illusion and wrung all he knew from him. Looking back, that might have made things a tad easier. It certainly would have prevented the madness that followed. As things stood, he simply couldn't bring himself to care. Now that he noticed it, he hadn't been comfortable with the starstruck look in the woman's eyes either. By the time the rest of the city guard finally noticed what he'd done, he'd plucked Fiora by the hand and led her away. You there, stand aside. He heard one such man holler. Funny how he found his courage now at his retreating back. We'll handle this. Madara felt his lip curl, as if these guards could handle anything worse than an unruly chicken. Careful, he reminded himself. Pride cometh before the fall. You know better than that. For someone who'd grown so accustomed to being a villain, the adulation of the people was an uncomfortable experience. On one hand, a selfish part of him wanted it, craved it, demanded more. Here was precisely the sort of recognition he'd never gotten while alive, and it proved a heady concoction. Thankfully these days his stubborn spirit was tempered by reality. He wanted nothing to do with these idiots. In part because they'd consistently proven themselves such during his last visit. Today's events only further reinforced his dim view of them. Better to lead a small, capable hamlet than a city of parade guards any day. Most gave him a wide berth as he wound through the streets. After all, this was hardly his first visit to the City of Stone.
He was known here, his reputation carved surer than stone. Even feared in some circles. His last visit here had been bloody. He'd been a different man then. One without a wife and daughter to temper his darker impulses. The Jarl had quivered in fear of him. So too did the Silver Blood family. Those who did not submit to his demands were either burned outright or trapped in hellish illusions. That day he slaughtered enough of them to make the rest pliable. How unfortunate that they'd forgotten their fear. The thought caused him to miss a step. He'd almost forgotten the true reason he was here in the first place. Escorting little Fiora was important of course as he was headed for the Jarl regardless, but in the chaos the true purpose of his visit had all but slipped his mind altogether. Idiot. Well, that certainly wasn't going to be the case anymore now, was it? A grim smile bloomed at the corner of Madara's mouth, followed by a bleak chuckle. With a quick turn, he ushered Fiora away from the temple. She tilted her little head at that. Where are we going? A gloved hand affectionately mussed her hair. To visit an old friend. 00000. Jarl Igmund was not accustomed to entertaining guests. Many years had turned him cold as the stone chair in which his father had sat. Markarth was a stern place, a harsh place, one not made for warmth and kindness. Oh, the occasional traveler would sometimes enter the keep, but they were almost always turned away unless they had pressing business with him. As such, he wasn't accustomed to having his power questioned by visitors. Certainly not the armed and armored sort that dared to approach the mournful throne. Not when he was so preoccupied with other matters, not with the forsworn menace at an all-time high. More fool, he. Thus, when someone approached the mournful throne he gave little thought to them. This stranger in dark armor. Their face concealed by a hood. At first. Nor did he regard their companion with particular interest. That slight-looking girl with flowers in her hair. You there, halt. A distant clamor caught his ears, only to be diverted by a bloody gurgle. By order of the Thalmor Urk? A high elf's head sailed across the steps and tumbled to a halt just below the throne. Even from his perch he could see Indolmar's face, his expression one of comical surprise, mouth open in a silent "oh" of shock and horror both. Not a heartbeat later, the severed skulls of his guards joined him on the steps, their own faces forever frozen, trapped in their last moments of mortal terror. On any other occasion Igmund might have found their demise amusing. Damn elves. He'd grown tired of their incessant prattling. Now, not so much. No, not nearly enough. This was going to cause a headache, he just knew it. Watching the hooded man climb the steps only made his temples pound. You stand before Igmund. He began wearily, FIFA migraine coming on, already tearing at his forehead. Son of Rolfter. Jarl of Markarth. Now surrender your weapons before. An invisible fist lashed out like the hand of an angry god to smash aside his guards, uncle, and House Carl alike. They toppled bonelessly down the steps still living, judging by their groans, but they were well and truly gone from this fight. If one could even call it such. Even as he reached for his weapon another blast of something smashed his sword arm down and flattened him against the mournful throne. No, he realized. Not something at all, but a hand, a giant skeletal hand comprised of bone and blue fire. A shadow of recognition stirred in the back of his mind. I know you, boy. A disinterested voice chimed from the shadows of that strange, shifting cowl. Tell me, how's your father doing these days? The Jarl of Markarth jerked against his bonds. You. Smirking, the owner of said voice threw back his hood. Me. Igmund choked on the words when he saw that face, every semblance of sense fleeing him alongside the blood in his face. He knew this man. That mace, his father had known both. If only because the former had beaten him half to death with the latter the last time he'd set foot in the keep. This man had carved a bloody swath through the city. He'd been just a boy back then, but he remembered it all too well. Stone shouldn't be able to burn, but burn it had that day, wreathed in azure flames. Fire fell from the sky in the form of countless comets, blasting the mountains and rattling the city below. It was as if Talos himself had come down from the heavens to wreak retribution upon him. No one knew save perhaps his father what had brought him to their doorstep. Markarth had never truly recovered from that day, nor had his father. Igmund had never truly recovered. Nay, the scent of fire and brimstone still haunted his dreams like a half-forgotten wraith, ready to pounce at the slightest provocation. He thought his city well and truly rid of it. Not so. Here it stood before him, holding him captive as surely as his own nightmares. But this was on dream, he knew. This was real. Terribly, horribly real. Now the dark specter of his dreams had come back to terrorize him again, and there was nothing he could do about it. Brandishing his bloody mace, Madara surged up the steps and seized the Jarl by the scruff of his neck. Twin crimson orbs blazed furiously before him, eradicating all thought. His smile left poor Igmund quaking in his stone throne. Hello again, boy. I've come to bargain. A.N. Decided to focus on Madara in this interlude, strange as it seems. It just goes to show that while you can take the uchiha out of the man, you can't take the man out of the uchiha. He might be reformed more or less, but those old instincts are still there, simmering under the surface. At best, I classify this iteration of him as lawful evil as opposed to Naruto's chaotic good. Both are powerful. But unlike a certain blonde, Madara is often the sort to ask, what's in it for me? Before helping someone, why should I devote my considerable resources to helping you? Or even, of what possible benefit would you be if you were to follow me? He's driven by his own creed and code, not whimsy or the need to help everyone he sees. Coin cannot sway him. Lust shall not move him. He will give you multiple chances to concede, but arrogance will only earn his ire. Once he sets his mind to something, very little if anything can possibly hope to change it. Hells, it took a world-altering event just to change his outlook on life and very stubborn woman to make him settle down. Perhaps that makes him ruthless, if a touch pragmatic. So he might be a bit softer, a bit more gray around the edges, but he will ruin anyone who crosses him or his family. Simple as that. Still, it sets him apart from Naruto in that our boy would have helped those people without a second thought. Not so the former Uchiha. Speaking of which, gods help us all when they finally bump into one another. Naruto gets the next one. I'm working 2 jobs at the moment, and my days off are few and far between. Of course, it helps to come home and read all these lovely reviews. Makes me feel like I'm making a difference out there, brightening people's lives by writing, you know? So, in the immortal words Atlas, review, would you kindly, and naturally, enjoy the previews. Previews. FOOL. Nothing personal, kid. Take off your hood. The stranger seemed oddly reluctant. I'd rather not, if it's all the same to you. Naruto felt his ears prick up at the sound of that voice, you. The blonde paused, hesitating for the merest of moments. Then he clambered on the dragon's thrashing back. He shouted at him, wild and furious. Vile words, old words, foul words, and the dragon bent to him. Wait, Carlia, you're drunk, aren't you? The little elf swayed on her feet. I'm not. Give me all your coin and nobody gets hurt. Oh, that's just precious, a foolish ambush. Wandering paths. Are you perhaps short of a marble? Really? Naruto grunted as he ducked under a blade. Is now really the time for this talk? Yes. Isabel growled back while she parried an axe and shunted it aside. We're lost again because of you. This is all your fault. Everything, every bit of it. Even the bandits? He howled. Even the bandits? To be fair, I might have read the map upside down. Someone took that as their cue to rush him and earned a Rasengan that sent him spinning away. It was an honest mistake, I swear. And you didn't notice until now? Sparks skittered from her fingertips and her unlucky attacker dropped with a yowl. How do you keep doing this? Are you a bad luck charm or something? As far as insults went, Naruto thought that one was particularly inspired. Downright brilliant, really. He gave it an 8 out of 10. Though Isabel admittedly lost some points on the dismount and delivery. For that alone, the Dragonborn deserved a retort of her own. A pun so powerful, a retort so scathing it would strike her deaf and dumb. Pity he couldn't be bothered to think of one at the moment. Still, her snark remark made him smile and lifted him right out of his foul mood. The men charging him, admittedly less so. Batting the bandit's blade aside with his right hand, he stepped into the man's guard and drove his head into the marauder's skull. An ugly crack greeted his ears, but the buffoon somehow managed to swipe at him as he crashed to the ground. Naruto caught him by the wrist, reared back, and ripped the weapon from his grasp. Blue Eyes took a moment to inspect the crude tool that tried to take his life. Shoddy work. A wrought iron sword, nearly blunt from use. You couldn't cut butter with this thing. Alo would have scoffed at it. He did so now. Really? He frowned down at the man annoyed, by the look of him as the poor sod stumbled upright. Just how did you intend to hurt me with this? You'd have better luck using your hands, or running away. Screw you. Instead, the man pulled a knife and tried to leap at him. Tried? Points for Moxie, if nothing else. Kurama scoffed in the back of his head. Well, he signed his death warrant. Tell me something I don't know. In a single seamless movement, Naruto took the knife on a lightly armored forearm and swung the useless bar of iron down on the bandit's skull. Superior speed and strength accomplished what the lack of an edge couldn't. Red spattered his cheeks and he sighed as he wiped it away. Damn it. He'd have to clean his armor again. On some level he knew he should feel guilty for killing the man. But he just couldn't muster up anything more than vague pity where highwaymen were concerned. When his victim slumped, the useless sword joined him. All too easy. A small part of him despaired at the ease of it all. Was it so wrong to want a good fight? Compared to dragons this lot was, well, paltry. Die, you stupid piece of schrock. Some poor fool leapt onto his back and attempted to drag him down. Points for effort, and points lost for stupidity. Naruto inhaled deeply, turned his head, and shouted, right in his face. That one did not die well. An arrow sailed over his shoulder as the poor bastard's corpse fell away, its shaft briefly brushing his cheek. With nary a sound he hurled a pair of kunai over his shoulder at the source. Immediate thunk greeted him as the throwing knives found the throat of Ernest Archer. The man dropped with a wet gurgle and turning, he found himself face to face with another trio of would-be thugs. Such a sloppy ambush. He'd heard them coming ages ago. Were they even trying? Honestly, kids these days. Right, this is the part where you two run away. He clicked his teeth together, lacing his words with a hint-killing intent. Shoo. Now. Get. I promise I won't chase you. Was it possible for a Khajiit to pale? Naruto honestly couldn't tell under all that fur. The two Bretons beside him had gone positively pallid. In the distance he heard the dragonborn roar. Not a heartbeat later 7 ruined corpses sailed over their heads and crashed down the hillside. He watched these 3 intently, saw the precise moment that their resolve broke, and gave them a push. Scoot. He hummed, deepening his voice, before I change my mind. They got credit where it was due, they almost made it, in that they managed all of 9 steps before a hail of ebony arrows flew out of the grand melee and found their hearts. Naruto whistled softly. Damn good shot, that. Through and through like nothing he'd ever seen. He'd agreed to let them go, true, but he'd made no such promises about Carlia. After a moment's thought he risked a glance over his shoulder to make sure the rest of his family was safe. Brit and Sissel waved back from a safe distance, shepherded by the bemused Nightingale herself. With her hood down, she made no effort whatsoever to hide her smirk. Enjoying yourself, are we? He called out to her. In response she guided an arrow right over his head to impale an unlucky wood elf that had been creeping up on him. He'd sensed them coming, and his lips puckered in a scowl. Hey, that was my kill. Another arrow dropped 2 men through the throat at once. Naruto fought down the slightest twitch. That still only counts as 1. A harsh peal of thunder caught his attention, though it stemmed not from the sky. He knew its source all too well. Isabelle was absolutely vicious with her wizardry. At some point she'd discarded her weapons and fallen back on her magic. The tide had begun to turn long before this, but her singular display sealed the deal. Fire and ice howled from her fingers as she levitated in place, ravaging Reaver and Road alike. In that moment she almost reminded him of an angry goddess. One enterprising bandit broke from his brothers and tried to rush her with his shield. She turned him to ashes in recompense for his temerity. Go, Mom, go, kick his ass, Sissel's all too familiar voice cried. Yeah, her twin agreed. Fuck him up. Naruto nearly choked on his own spit. Brit? Sissel? Where did you learn those words, word gak?
He was still speaking when a mace shattered against his skull and caused him to bite his tongue. Bits of ruined metal rained down on his head.
Kurama openly guffawed. Naruto. Less so. Blue eyes narrowed as he found the responsible party. A startled orc balked back at him, clutching the ruined haft of his once might weapon. Wide eyes drifted down to the sundered stick in his grasp. Then the blonde who was even now brushing the last of the sundered steel from his hair. Whatever words the bandit wanted to say died away as those azure orbs burned scarlet. Really? Attacking a man when he's talking to his daughters? Naruto planted both hands on his hips and scowled at him. Well, what do you have to say for yourself? Mercy, my lord. The orc croaked the question. Naruto tilted his head. Would you show me mercy? A bead of cold sweat ran down the marauder's brow. Well, no. It was precisely the wrong thing to say. Alas, he realized it too late, much too late. Yup. A hand closed around his throat, hoisting him into the air, then higher still. That's what I thought. In hindsight, he could have just hit him with a Rasengan or something, but with the girls watching, he felt the need to show off. Just a bit.
It was a good throw all things considered. The orc all but vanished from Naruto's grasp, simply ceased to exist entirely. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, a shrieking green speck on the far horizon. Brittle and Sissel cooed in delight and clapped behind him as he sketched a bow. Not a single bandit came anywhere near him after that. Rather, they didn't have a chance to. Isabelle never gave them one. Bright eyes pulsed, glowing impossibly bright as the seething sorceress clenched her right hand into a claw and waved it at the last of the bandits. Belatedly, he noticed the cut on her arm where a weapon drawn blood. Ghastly red light bled from the wound trailed in its wake, carving an eldritch swath behind her.
Enough of this, she howled. All of you, die. Remarkably, they did just that, because that ghastly scarlet radiance swooped at the marauders like 1,000 ravens and pulled the life from their bodies. As one, the last of them crumpled bonelessly to the soil. Brit and Sissel applauded her, blissfully unaware of what had just happened. They probably thought she'd knocked the lot of them out, not drank their life force like a glass of wine. What was she, a blood mage or something, and did she seem pale all of a sudden? Kurama pounced on it. We've seen that trick before.
Naruto grimaced at the sight. That spell, it reminded him of a spell Sarana had once used, though not with her own blood. Wait, did that mean? 2 thoughts clicked together in the back of his head and he ruthlessly shook his head. Nope, he decided. Not going to think about it. Not at all. Not touching that problem with a 10-foot pole. It could be a different spell. Perhaps he was seeing things. Maybe it was a trick of the light or just a trick unique to Isabel herself. Yeah, had to be.
He had no intention of opening the can of worms. Remind me to stay on your good side. The Dragonborn rounded on him with a hiss, and for an awful moment, he thought he glimpsed a desperate hunger in her eyes. But only for a moment. It faded as her feet found the earth once more, and her once pale skin seemed to regain its natural hue as Carlyle led the girls over to them. Throughout the exchange, her bright eyes never left his. She looked uncertain, hesitant. Did you? No. Naruto smacked his lips with a resounding pop and shook his head rapidly. I saw nothing, I heard nothing, I know nothing. Oh, she accepted the distraction for it was and took it as an olive branch. Then, thank you. The faintest smile quirked her lips. You're still a bad luck charm, though. Says the girl with mommy issues. He snarked at her. Isabel turned crimson, her earlier fears forgotten. Why you take that back? Take it back at once. You promised to write to her, didn't you? Still, he continued to tease. Her face went positively scarlet. Stop it, never. Naruto leapt at the opportunity to fall back into their usual banter as she squawked at him, to talk about something else. Anything else? Whatever secrets this little dragonborn had, they were hers to keep. If she wanted to speak of whatever the hell that was, then that was her business. Not his. He was more than willing to listen. Just not now. Not with Carlyle and the children bearing down on them. That was amazing. Sissel reached them first and he swept her off her feet onto the back of his neck. You gotta teach me how to fight like that. When you're older, he promised her, much, much older. She slumped against him. When he looked back he found Brit badgering Isabel with similar requests. It was almost cute, watching the dragonborn buckle like that. Who would have guessed that she had a weakness for children? A faint, fond smile lighted her face as she all but scooped her adopted daughter onto her back, where the little girl latched on like a limpet. Warmed his heart, it did. Made him miss Arwen and Sarana, too. They really did need to get back to Whiterun soon. If their luck would just hold. Carlyle reached him a heartbeat later. Her hip brushed against his as she rested her head against his shoulder. Any injuries? Was she really that worried about him? Just a headache, he sang back as she lifted his right arm. Really, they barely scratched me. Yes, I can see that. She hummed, inspecting a faint rent in his armor just below the armpit. Her keen gaze fell to Sissel, still perched atop his shoulders. Please get down for a moment, dear girl. This won't take long. Sissel frowned. Promise? Pinky promise. Carlyle held out her little finger and the girl clasped it. With a long-suffering sigh, Sissel slipped down his shoulders and slid to the floor to join her sister. Don't do anything yucky, okay? Naruto Absolute did not laugh, though his shoulders vibrated from the effort. Yucky? Whatever do you mean? She screwed up her nose. You know what I mean. Gross things. No holding hands, no kissing. He couldn't help but chuckled at that. You say it's gross now, sure, but in a few years. La 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 la. I can't hear you. I do wish you'd be more careful. Carlyle returned her attention to him as their ward stormed off, hands clamped tight over little ears. Her smile warmed him more than words. You were downright reckless out there when you needed be. Before he could think to argue otherwise, the dark elf drew out a tiny red vial from her flask and pushed it into his hands. Here, drink this. That knife was coated with a light poison. I know you're immune to most toxins, but I'd rather not take the chance. Naruto wrinkled his nose as he pulled the cork free from the vial. It smelled foul. Do I have to? She jabbed his chest with a finger. Drink, or you'll be made to drink. Really, you don't have to worry. He rolled his eyes but drank the foul concoction anyway, downing it to the very last drop. Yuck. Grimacing at its taste, he lobbed the now empty vial into a bush. It was just a bunch of bandits. They weren't going to kill me. Anyone can be killed, Naruto. Lovely lilac eyes rose to regard him with quiet solemnity. You do well to remember that. He winced, realizing he'd upset her. I didn't mean to upset you. No, it's all right. Carlyle held up a hand to forestall an argument. We've been on the road for days now and I've become a bit cross because of it. It's not your fault, I just... Without thinking, he stepped forward and took her hands in his own. It was a simple gesture on his part. Something to show that he understood. That he still cared. Yet her dark cheeks flushed with the faintest hint of pink as he looked on. Just a little, just a touch, enough for him to notice. She made no effort to pull her palms away and her thumbs began to trace tiny circles against his calloused hands. As if she were making sure he was an actual person, not some figment of her imagination. Such a small act, but it warned him more than words ever could. We've not had much time together since Winterhold, she mumbled. You must think me a fool for acting like this. Nah. Naruto hummed back. I don't blame you, we're both on edge here. Sentiment. Kurama sulked. I'd almost forgotten how much I loathed it. Wake me when you're done mooning at one another. Naruto ignored him and leaned down to press his forehead against Carlia's, leaving their noses brushing. She stepped closer in response to lean against him. Her scent flooded his nose, bringing with it the faint aroma of wildflowers and leather and the faintest hint of sweat. They stood in comparative silence for a long moment, simply basking in one another. No words were needed. Without warning, Carlia surged upward and pressed her lips to his. Her mouth was warm and hot and hungry against his, filling Naruto's veins with fire he'd almost forgotten. He sucked in a sharp breath through his teeth as his hands released hers and clamped down on her waist to drag her closer, even as she flung her own around his neck. So close, too close. Their armor was a hindrance, a nuisance, one they wanted nothing more than to remove. Really? Isabel made a retching sound in the background. Get a room. Ew, yuck. The twins echoed her not a heartbeat later. Gross, gross, gross. Naruto pulled away with a sigh and stilled his impulse to lash out. Carlia bristled in his arms, looking like she might have some choice words for the Dragonborn, but he was quick to still her anger with another quick peck on the lips. They'd lasted this long. They could stand to wait a little longer, agonizing as it might be. Later, she mouthed at him. It was all he could do not to smile. So he patted his back instead. All right, Sissel. Come here, you little Amater clambered onto his shoulders with nary a sound, and they were off again. With the bandits dispatched, their little band was free to move on down the road relative silence. No one else dared challenge them. It gave Naruto a chance to plot his payback against Isabel as they walked. Of course he didn't truly blame her for that earlier insult. She'd every right to snap at him back there. It was simply the way she'd done it that rubbed him raw and set him in an impish mood. She made it sound like this was all intentional on his part, a deliberate ruse, or an act to have them wandering around the whole of Skyrim. Nonsense. Papa? Sissel asked suddenly from her place atop his shoulders. What's a marble? Well, Naruto grinned, his voice adopting a bemused lecturing tone. It's a small ball you see. When you used to. Brit chimed in from her own perch atop the Dragonborn's back before he could finish. So was Mama saying you don't have any balls? A beat of awkward silence pushed itself between their little family, but only for a moment, until Naruto absolutely cackled. Carlia muffled a laugh behind her palm, bright eyes wide with amusement. Izzy squawked. Who taught you to talk like that? Sorry sweetheart, the wayward shinobi sighed, wiping a mirthful tear from his eye. I've heard that one before. Remind me to tell you about a man named Sai sometime. I still say he doesn't have any, Isabel snorted. He does, actually. Izzy gagged, tripped over her own 2 feet, and crashed headlong into an unsuspecting tree. Carlia didn't laugh at her plight. She was too mature for that. She did, however, shoot him a bemused look as she sauntered away from him, not so subtly running a hand down her flank through the dark leathers, then over the subtle curve of her behind. Oh. Naruto felt his throat go dry as his heart skipped a beat. Clever girl, Carlia. Clever girl. What's wrong, little Miss Archmage? He pressed his advantage with a knowing leer. Nothing to say? Isabel's face turned a lovely shade of red as she swiped at him half-heartedly. I told you not to call me that. You did. His head bobbed as he ducked her grasping hand. I chose not to listen. Long live the mistress of magic. Long may she reign. She snatched a pebble off the road and pegged him in the ass. Naruto chuckled and kept walking. Still, Dragonborn or not, her earlier argument held a nugget of concerning truth. He was beginning to think he really was cursed or something. You couldn't get lost this easily. It just wasn't possible. Had one of the gods done it? A rogue Daedra? Perhaps. No matter how he tried, he seemed destined to get lost. It should have been a relatively straight shot to Whiterun from Winterhold, but somehow, someway, somewhere, he managed to lose his way. Eventually, their path brought them to a cozy little hamlet that wasn't on the map. Nowhere he could find, at least Naruto assumed it was a hamlet. He couldn't quite see it over the rise, but he saw the signs of human habitation all the same. His stomach growled treacherously at the thought, hearkening to the notion of a fresh meal. Rations were all well and good when you were camping, but he'd grown tired of eating. Perhaps they have supplies? Carlia suggested. Or food? Food? Sissel perked up, eyes regaining their former spark. I'm starving. Brit uttered a jaw-popping yawn and slumped against Isabel's back, sleepy. And beds. Naruto amended with a light laugh. A nap sounds lovely right about now. They met a gruff man at gate. In hindsight it couldn't really be called a gate at all, more a wooden barrier operated by a crank. The rest was somewhat under construction at the moment, but beggars couldn't be choosers he supposed. Regardless, they found themselves challenged by a soldier clad in a red cloak and dark armor. Unusual, that. He'd not seen someone wearing that kind of attire before. And that beard. By the log. A bird could live in there, a whole flock of them. Who approaches the bloody gate? He challenged them as they drew near. The bloody Dragonborn and Dragonbane. Naruto yawned, with their traveling companions, and you are. Bjorn. The guard unbent enough to grunt his name, but remained otherwise unfazed. HRMPH. Dragonborn, EH, don't suppose you can prove it? Naruto cocked his head and his shout rattled the world like a whip, birthing a writhing WYRM of flame that held up into the clouds. Isabel answered him a heartbeat later, further sundering the sky with a primal roar of pure force. Sissel and Brit clapped as only children could. When both looked back, the man's tan face had gone pale. By the gods, he muttered and made a sign for safety. My apologies, we don't get many visitors here, not with the silver bloods and forsworn about. We're no friend of those liars and thieves, good sir. Isabel surprised Naruto then, both by stepping forward and taking the initiative. We seek only warm beds, good food, and shelter for the night. She actually sketched a bow, an actual bow, to the baffled guard as he looked on. We'll be on our way come morning, you have my word. Brit's head popped over her mother's shoulder, pinky promise. Definitely, Sissel seconded her sister with a cry of her own. Bjorn's face softened at the sight of them. They yours? Naruto and Isabel exchanged a bemused look, something like that. And the elf? Also with us. Naruto clicked his tongue. Carlia tilted her head, a dangerous look in her eye. Is there a problem? Nay, far enough. Your business is your own. With that said, Bjorn drew himself up, pulled a horn from his belt, and blew a single note into it. Open the gate. With a weary creak, a portion of the wooden palisade creaked open to grant them entry. For something so recently built, it certainly worked well. That suggested some level of competence at least. Brit babbled a curious query about it, briefly distracting Isabel and Carlia as Naruto. Our lord's away on business, the guard informed him as they were admitted. You'll be wanting his wife, Katria. She and Lara will fix you up right and proper. Naruto clasped his hand. Thanks for that. We'll be out of your hair soon, promise. I'll be holding you to that. Don't cause trouble and you won't get any. Once they entered it, Karthwasten really wasn't much to look at, all things considered. It could only be called a hold fast in a loose sense of the word. There was a mine surrounded by a few thatch house and a field near the east of the river. Truly it was average in almost every way. A second gate could be seen near the southern end of the village, hastily being built by a number of men and women. Their haste unnerved him, but it was nothing to speak ill of. And yet there was something about this place. A faint sense of unease pervaded the air as they made their way down the path. Keen eyes followed them as they walked. Bjorn had been right. These folk weren't keen on the idea of visitors. Something wrong? Carlia brushed against Naruto, claiming his attention. I'm not sure, he confessed, scratching at a whiskered cheek as they walked. A stray chicken scuttled by underfoot and he was careful to step over it, rather than around the fowl. He made that mistake once before. Once. Never again. The last thing he wanted was to bring the whole village down on their heads. Folks liked their chickens. The inn turned out to be one of the larger buildings in Karth, simple yet homely. A warm hearth crackled within, providing fresh heat against the bitter chill in the air. The twins saw their chance for what it was and all but bolted toward the fire, eager to warm their hands. Naruto watched them for a brief moment to make sure they didn't trip and fall in. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Rapid ones, slamming down the stairs at a breakneck pace. Papa. Scarce had he turned than he found himself gazed down at a gangly girl clad in a red dress. Brit and Sissel perked up, no doubt glad to find a girl their age, but Naruto frowned at this slip of a girl, and dark hair seemed almost familiar. More than that, he could have sworn he sensed some semblance of chakra for a moment there. That was absurd, of course. No one had chakra coils in Skyrim. Not a single soul. It must have been his imagination. He was just jumping in shadows. No, Kurama reared his head. I definitely sensed something. There's more to that one that meets the eye. Be wary of her. Fortunately, said girl drooped the moment she got a good look at them. Oh, you're not Papa. I am not. Naruto unbent enough to pat her head. Sorry about that. Her dark eyes brightened. Well, in that case. Quick as a flash, she changed gears and oh gods, why was she focused on him? Who are you? Where'd you come from? She latched onto his sleeve in startled babbling. Where have you been? Do you have any stories to tell? Don't mind my daughter. A young woman clad in steel armor approached them with a bemused smile. Lara's been a bit stir-crazy since her father left for Markarth. Isabel frowned. He's coming back, right? Her laughter surprised them. He'd better, if he knows what's good for him. You'll be wanting beds then, I take it. Food. Brit groaned and pawed at the air. Boss. Sissel argued. Please, oh, please, let there be a bath. Aye, we have those if you've got the coin. Katria favored them with a bemused smile. Why don't you dears go play with Lara? She caught the pouch of coin Carlisle lobbed her away with deceptive grace and tucked it into her belt. I'll have something ready for you in a jiff. Quick as a flash, she snatched up an empty mug from a nearby table, then whipped it across the room at a sleeping man. Ivar, wake up, you lazy sod, there's work to be done. Unfortunately, that left Naruto with a very energetic girl clinging to his arm, and an eerie thought. Say, does your old man have a name? Lara tilted her head to one side. Why? Just, an awful thought seized him, and he gulped. Humor me, please. Well, alright. Papa is Papa. Lara smiled guilelessly, but Mama calls him Madara. Naruto's world shattered into 1,000 pieces. Excuse me? A.N. Behold, the time approaches. References for days. Also, oh dear. Our boys are close to meeting and it promises to be explosive. I feel I should also point out, though it's been said many a time before, Madara obviously landed in Skyrim years before Naruto due to space-time shenanigans. He's been in Skyrim for just about a decade now, while Naruto hasn't even been in Tamriel for a year. No matter how they might be now, it doesn't change the fact that Naruto and Madara have some bad blood between them. After all, Madara's machinations led to the death of Naruto's parents, while Naruto put up a fight long enough to ruin Madara's plans. Sure, they might get along after they duke it out now. Might is the key word. Gods help us all when they finally bump into one another. But like I've said in the past, reviews are fuel, and they spur me and the gang to write all the faster. And it means longer chapters. Think on that for a moment. So in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? It keeps us all alive. Without reviews, we wither and die. Sorry, but that's the truth. Now then, we do hope you enjoy the previews. Read at your own risk, of course. Spoilers. 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 Plot details ahoy. Ye be warned. Previews. This feels cliché. I'm just washing your back, you louse, now hold still. Brit and Sissel splashed about with a laugh. Dragon. Mine. I saw it first. Hell no, I'm starving. I call dibs. You're insane. Both of you. Absolutely insane. You know what they say, even a broken is right twice a day. Then what does that say about you? Oh ho, nice jab. Naruto blinked rapidly. So, is there a reason you cornered me like this? Sarana was silent for a long, painful moment. Then she raised her head. I need a favor, but I also need you to calm down. Where's Ayla? She's gone. Sarana took a quick step back when he hissed. She was taken. By whom? It took everything he had to force the words out, to not give in to his rage. His world shattered like broken glass as she told him. A beat of horrible silence fell over the world as he beheld the ruined house. All the while his mind roared. Get her back. Bring her back. There's still time. You can save her. It's not too late. She's still alive. You need to kill them, kill them, kill them. I was traveling like a man. He growled. Slowly. I wanted to see everything this world had to offer. Blue eyes blazed red. No more. What is better, to be born good? Or to overcome your evil nature through great effort? Do you have an answer? I do not. Such an inquiry bears pondering. Dark of night, fragment, vampires struck under cover of darkness. Dark of heart and sure in air purpose, their assassins descended upon Karthwasten in the dead of night. Not in a swarm, for to do so would attract undue attention from the rest of the world. It was not unheard to see so many on the roads given the state of the war, but such risks could not be tolerated. They arrived in pairs. 3 men and 3 women, perfectly balanced, as all things should be. 6 were more than equal to such a task, more than suitable to wipe out a sleepy village such as this. But before the feast must come the bloodletting. They were here to avenge their lost lord, to strike a blow at his killer, and if possible, slay him in his sleep. Their sources were reliable. They knew he was here, he and his companions alike. There would be no survivors. One of them eased the door open and crept across the threshold. Finally, a man's voice rang from within. We've been waiting forever, now. A bolt of white-hot spellfire shot out of the dark and obliterated the leader's head. Followed by his unlucky second, who'd stood just a bit too close. Blood spattered the floor. The third and fourth drew their blades, only for a voice like wrath-filled thunder to ring out and sap them of their vitality. They at least died on their feet, their lifeless bodies crumpling to the floor. The fifth tried to flee and summarily fell as a crossbow bolt pierced the small of their back and impaled them against a wall. She writhed there, hissing furiously, but her hands could not remove the holy bolt. In an instant, 4 were dead, 1 captured. The 6th fumbled for their axe and lunged forward. If he could just strike him. Leave that one alive, Izzy. The man's voice spoke anew from the gloom. I want to interrogate her. The weapon started true, slamming into his gut. Or so he'd thought. Calm down. Clenched fingers closed around the cursed weapon, shattering it to pieces. Red eyes rose to meet his, dark and slitted, Kurama. The assassin found themselves face to face with a monstrous beast. They froze. Indeed, the moment they did, a hand closed around their throat. Their would-be victim smiled, all but grinning from ear to ear. It was not a nice smile. Your kind never learn, do you? He cooed, voice throbbing as another spoke with him, through him. But that's alright. I hear Dad's a good teacher. .0.0.0. Sarana found him the next morning. In hindsight, Naruto wasn't quite sure why he was surprised. She'd proven herself quite capable of tracking him down when she wanted to. Vampires were powerful creatures, and she was yet stronger still. If she'd meant to warn him, she was a bit late on that front. That she'd come all the way out to Karthwasten just to find him didn't bode well. She favored the marks of the massacre with a sigh. I see they found you first. They did. He nudged the smoldering pile of ashes with a toe. So, is there a reason you cornered me like this? His brow rose further, away from everyone. Sarana was silent for a long, painful moment. Then she raised her head. He knew then. At least, he thought he knew. Listen. Her eyes flashed with sympathy beneath the hood. I need a favor. But I also need you to calm down. It's about Ayla. His brow rose and she raised a hand. Like I said. Calm, deep breaths. Something in the back of his head twitched. What about her? She's gone. Sarana took a quick step back when he hissed. She was taken from Whiterun in the night. By whom? It took everything he had to force the words out, to not give in to his rage. Sarana told him. His world shattered like broken glass as she told him. A beat of horrible silence fell over the world as he imagined the chaos, saw the ruined house in his mind's eye. Kurama was trying to speak to him but the words were distant, fuzzy, faded. All the while his mind roared. Get her back. Bring her back. There's still time. You can save her. It's not too late. She's still alive. You need to kill them, kill them, kill them. Sarana saw the wrath in his eyes. It's not your fault. She touched a hand to his shoulder, not daring to kiss him as he was now. You weren't there. I should have been. Clawed fingers bit into his palms, sending blood sluicing across his flesh, but I wasn't. I was traveling like a man. He growled. Slowly. I wanted to see everything this world had to offer. Blue eyes blazed red. No more. And there we go. Next time. A beast unleashed. But like I've said in the past, reviews are fuel, and they spur me to write all the faster. And it means longer chapters. Think on that for a moment. So in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? It keeps me alive. Without reviews, I wither and die. Sorry, but that's the truth. Now then, we do hope you enjoy the previews. Read at your own risk, of course. Spoilers. 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 Plot details ahoy. Ye be warned. Previews. How did you know? I'd be a very bad shinobi if I could see an ambush coming. So, he stood slowly, like an old man stretching his stiff joints. Do you want to dance? Naruto snarled. My child. They tried to kill my child. He inhaled deeply. Carlia must have seen the look of pure murder flash across his face, because she stepped back, hauling everyone else with her. Just as well. The ground cratered. His body pulsed gold. You will all die screaming. Madara saw the mountain implode from a nearby peak. Well, he muttered. Someone's grown stronger. I suppose I'll have to chat with him eventually. Boys, be sensible about this. They butted heads. No, the end piece.